Okay, good evening everyone. It's now 6 o'clock, so we're going to get this evening's PTR ONS committee underway. This meeting is being held in the Beehive instead of the council chamber, and as such there is a time limit for use of this venue. That is 9:30, so if there are any items on the agenda that aren't concluded by then, we will adjourn and recommence the December meeting, which is currently on to the 7th. If this does happen, we will look to adjourn once a report has been concluded, not during the middle of one. I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and will be publicised on the council's website. Officers attending virtually on Microsoft Teams, please use your raise a hand option when you wish to speak, and Grace will let me know. So the PTR meeting on the 15th of September was postponed due to venue issues. We will now commence that meeting and open the agenda for the 15th of September 2021. The items on this agenda have been rearranged for the 5th of October 2021 meeting, which is now tonight, and I've agreed for the Thurrock Transport Strategy and Vision to be circulated to members as a briefing note. So I'll now close the 15th of September 2021 meeting, and we will now open the agenda for tonight's meeting. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence. I've not received any apologies. Grace, have you received any apologies?
No, Chair, I haven't received any apologies, but I note that Councillor Van Day isn't here yet.
Thank you. Item number 2, are the minutes of the previous meeting approved?
Agreed.
Items of urgent business. So I've not agreed to any items of urgent business. However, everyone has had sight of the Thurrock Transport Strategy briefing note. Are members happy to agree this? Have members read?
I've not had a chance to read it yet, Chair. I only came through earlier today and I've been at work, but chat to the other members.
We won't agree that item.
We'll bring it up again at the next meeting.
Yeah. Okay. So the next item number 4, are the declaration of interests. Are there any declaration of interests? Great. Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in relation to item 6, which is the parking policy and strategy. I live in a PPA area, so I just thought I'd better declare that one from the worker.
Thank you. Item number 5. This is the first report of the evening and can be found on page 13. This is flooding in Thurrock, and I shall pass over to Nav.
Thank you. So this paper kind of reflects back on the flooding incident that occurred back in January of this year. It's taken quite some time to get here through a number of reasons with cancellation. But it's an opportunity just to go through with yourselves the events of what happened, and then some of the outcomes that have come as a result. So cast your mind back to the 30th and 14th of January, and then again the 27th and 28th of January of this year. There were a number of consistent and heavy rainfall events that were in Thurrock and much of Essex and beyond. And we ultimately had wetter than average conditions across the borough over a prolonged period of time, which ultimately resulted in events of surface water flooding and river flooding and raised water courses within the borough, which caused a great deal of alarm for a number of residents and resulted in a small number of internal flooding of properties. To some degree, it was kind of quoted that flooding of this nature hadn't been seen in a generation in the borough. People quoting around 40 years since the last time we had flooding of that nature. As a unitary authority, Thurrock Council is designated as the lead local flood authority, and I am the LFA manager. And we have an overarching responsibility for managing flood risk. Our highways team have a responsibility to ensure that highways are free of flooding, but we don't have a statutory duty to actually resolve and rectify flooding. In regards to the event, we saw that heavy rain, approximately 20 to 25 millimetres of rainfall, happen overnight on the 13th into the 14th of January, which went on into the morning, which is significant but not a very, very, very wet event. And what we started to see as the day progressed was accumulation of water starting to form across the borough, with raised water levels in watercourses and lots of pools of standing water starting to form in gardens and fields and across the area. It predominantly affected the east of the borough in Stamford-le-Hope, and then later on into that weekend, the west of the borough in Purfleet. And predominantly, the biggest reason for this event was that the East of England region had for leading up to previous 6 or so months a wetter summer than had been experienced in quite some time. So ultimately, we had 30% more rain than we usually had. And January itself was about 40% more rainfall than you would normally expect in that month. The months of January and December, so December 2020 and January 2021, were, according to Anglian Water, the wettest January and December months recorded in 100 years. So we had ultimately lots of rain in that area. The reason why we start to see those problems is because of that wet, prolonged period of wet weather, is that ground saturation starts to become a problem, and therefore the water in the ground itself starts to become waterlogged. So rather than having one really, really heavy downpour, that's it, over a period of time, there's just been nowhere for that water to go, and then all of a sudden you have a prolonged, consistent period of rain, and ultimately that water then can no longer go down into the ground and either sits on top or starts to leach out into all the various watercourses, drains, ditches, etc. Compounded with that problem, with the additional water in the watercourses, you have our outfalls in the borough. So we have one in Stamford-le-Hope, Mucking Sluice. This is a gravity-fed outfall, and basically the tide of the River Thames also came into play into this situation. The sluice is designed to shut up when the tide comes in, so therefore, and it's ultimately designed to stop the Thames flowing back up in towards residential areas. In this situation, what that meant is that the water that was also trying to get out, which was greater than had usually been experienced, and the Environment Agency informed that the water level recorded at Mucking Sluice in that morning was the highest that they'd ever experienced, meant it couldn't go anywhere, so it starts to back up. So on top of that, you've got more water coming in because the wider catchment is starting to collect water and it's starting to bring it out, and it starts to collect. So at that point along Mucking Creek and Stamford-le-Hope is where you see the wider accumulation of water, and therefore you have raised water levels in the watercourse, and then you ultimately see some of that water going over the top of the banks, and you start to see that water there. And ultimately, as that day progresses, so in that morning, you do start to see water escape from Mucking Creek until the tide comes in, and then you see the issues kind of escalate a little bit. Yeah. This results in where a number of developments have outfalls, so their surface water piping to remove water from the development going out. They kind of are designed to sit at a level, but where the water has risen in the watercourse, ultimately there's nowhere for that water to go, so it starts to run back onwards. So some of the developments on Belreed Close and Runnymede Road, where their outfalls are unable to now discharge that water out, and so you start to see flooding in that road and in that what is private housing development. Over the course of the day, we are kind of reacting to delivering that and resolving that. As the day comes to an end, what we then start to see is issues in sort of Balvin, where that water is now starting to accumulate, and that led to closure of Fen Lane. And then you start to see the problem in the west of the borough, sorry, over that weekend, because the Mardyke catchment is significantly larger, so it's coming from much, much further afield, and then it starts to accumulate. And then there were also issues with the sluice over at the Mardyke that was being repaired at the same time. And then we have a similar situation 2 weeks later within the borough, where there isn't problem isn't as significant as it was in the 14th and 13th of January, but we have high levels of water in the watercourses over that time period. Ultimately, with the exception of the issues that affected the Mardyke sluice, there is little evidence within the investigation work that we've done that shows that it was a lack of maintenance that caused this problem. And that is through discussions with other authorities as well that start to experience similar situations. I think Malden had called an emergency with issues happening at the time. And that can also be supported with the fact that actually we've probably had similar rainfall levels since, and there haven't been those repeated issues. So it's that prolonged rainfall prior to that. One of the outcomes is that we have undertaken a debrief, and within the pack there are a range of actions that we have looked at undertaking to try and ensure that we avoid and better plan against incidents of this nature in the future. One of those key actions in particular is undertaking enforcement action. And that is spread across the borough, those actions. There are 9 sites that we are trying to enforce against. And these are generally against areas where there are large ditches that need clearing with large landowners. And so that's an ongoing issue that we're trying to resolve. And that's working with our legal team to do that. And it is quite a challenging process because it can be fought in court. And that's one of the processes we have to open. One of the outcomes of the flooding event was that at the same time, by coincidence, we were also submitting an application to the DEFRA and the Environment Agency for a project on innovative resilience measures to look at how we could tackle flooding without hard infrastructure. Working with Southend Borough Council as a collaborative joint bid, we have been successful in being awarded £6.4 million. And that's roughly split 50-50. And the idea of that project is to mirror what we do in each authority. And so what happened in these flood events, we were actually able to include in our submission to DEFRA, and that helped show that there was need. That project is made up in 3 parts, and it looks at the entire catchment. So it's split an upper catchment, where we will look at working with landowners to try and stop water and hold it in place so that you can discharge it at a slower rate as it goes down, to work in the middle of the catchment, particularly within residential areas, to try and hold the water and utilise that water for other purposes, i.e. using rainwater to use for toilets, etc. So it doesn't just go straight into the drainage system. And at the bottom of the catchment, working with the old landfill sites, because Southend have a number as well, and to try and minimise the impact of erosion and contamination that might occur because of that through action in the Thames. So that's the project. That is a 6-year project that we are working now to submit a full business case to DEFRA and the Environment Agency by the end of March, and that will come to this committee in February. And then it's a 6-year that takes us through to March 2027. Delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Nav. Just a quick one from myself on that final point you were making on the funding award. You mentioned a number of the innovative resilience sort of techniques that will be used. The word innovative leads me to believe that's all new techniques that we're using. So how effective are they going to be? I think it's great that we've acquired this money, and it's fantastic if they're innovative, but the primary sort of adjective I'm concerned with is effective. So have these been tested in other areas? How effective?
So that is the purpose of the project, is to be a leader in that and identify how effective these measures are and what that can be done. So, for example, whilst measures like natural flood management have been applied elsewhere and do show to be low cost, low maintenance ways of holding water back so that it doesn't just all flood through. So some of it still goes through, but not at a rate, and you can hold it across a larger area of land. Some of the stuff such as rainwater harvesting are measures that haven't fully been implemented in the UK in the past, and it's working with landowners and homes to try and implement those and work on those, and then also kind of working on the lower catchment with the landfill sites, identifying what those measures are. All those measures haven't actually been fully worked up yet because we're still only in a business case scenario at the moment. So we have quite some time to fully identify all those measures and put those forward. That's where that business case will be brought back in early next year.
Thank you. Is that Councillor Kerrin?
Yeah, thank you for the report, especially the verbal part of it as well. I thought you sort of filled in a lot of the detail there. I've got a very specific question and a more general one. Firstly, on page 17 at the bottom, it says that the test cases will be resolved by the end of summer 2021. So looking out the window, I think we could agree it's the end of summer 2021. Have those test cases been resolved?
They haven't been resolved. We actually had a conversation about this yesterday. So one of the learning outcomes of this is that enforcement measures are not quite as easy to take forward as quickly as you'd hope. One of the biggest lessons we learned is we probably bit off a little bit more than we could chew with the enforcement. So 9 sites in hindsight is probably too many. And the challenges of actually managing that enforcement process. So we are still going through, we've had some responses, and then there are others that we have to chase up through threatening processes.
Okay.
Ultimately, so the next step is issuing Section 25 notices to those and then picking that back up with our legal team to take forward. And
do you think, that just following on from that one, that when it is resolved and the full learning has been sort of actioned, we could have sort of a briefing note on, so we know at the end of it, like these have all been resolved now, this is what we've learned from it, and we could sort of get that information.
Yeah, I mean, we can share the sites that we are looking at doing. So some of those sites are relevant for my area as from flood risk perspective, and some of those have been long-standing issues, and some of them are in collaboration with our highways colleagues because they have been experiencing where ditches haven't been cleared, actually flooding of the highway, and then dangerous outcomes resulting. So it's kind of a collaborative process that we're working on together to try and resolve these and to just understand how that process is. So yeah, we can come back with kind of the full list of these measures.
Really interesting, I think.
How we've done that. I mean, some of these are improving the website, some of these are actually doing that enforcement stuff. One of the key things we'd like to outcome will be from this funding project is actually having far greater engagement with the landowners. Yeah. And I think that's something that's been missing and something that we can work on better as well. Because actually, I think sending letters to a landowner and asking or demanding that they do something probably isn't the best place to start from. But there just hasn't been that resource in place beforehand. And that's what this project will also allow us to do.
Thank you. No, just one more, Chair, if that's all right. Just because the recommendation isn't just to note the report, it's to endorse the action plan. Looking through the action plan, there's a lot to identify, to determine, to identify, to build upon. So what I'm sort of asking, what things on the action plan do you think are concrete things that you would like us to endorse? And am I misreading this? It almost reads as if prior to this flood in January, there wasn't really anything in place, and now we're in the process of trying to determine what our responsibilities are. I don't know if it's the wording.
I think probably the word. It's probably better if I go back and say, there were things in place. Yeah. One of the challenges is flooding hadn't really been experienced in quite some time, and I think some of that knowledge of where it was reflected had kind of gone, and the collaborative work across departments and what this process has actually allowed us to do is understand actually it was all there and these were all the bits and connecting it all together. Yeah. So it's actually enabled us to work far more with our emergency planning team. Yeah. And since then we've kind of run a drill in terms of what would happen in a very serious flooding incident. Yeah. With all the team together in terms of who would undertake actions. Yeah, we're looking at things not just how would we impact our school crossing patrols, etc. So I think it's some of that, and it's helped us to get a better understanding of actually how we do this. Some of this was, I think we kind of said we actually did work quite well and resolve things. It was the way information came into the authority, and so it's kind of picking up as to how we can maximise that and make it more efficient in the future. It came in a very sporadic way.
Right,
It came
okay.
into if you knew someone did something, it went to them, and it was collating that. And actually, now we know actually what systems it's going to go on, how we do it, what is the phone number we want to give, and how it can be reported. So we've done some of this work already with sort of like a contact centre team, and then how they're going to record it as well. So it's identifying the correct phone number that the residents should contact or members should contact. And then it gets recorded onto the Simology system, and then that system will then go directly to our highways team, who are then able to do that sandbag. So we have on here like to determine the responsibility, providing sandbags, and that was something that was kind of said at the outset. Actually, yes, we want to keep doing that, and whatnot. So it allows us to do that. So I think so like the action plan was written, in terms of what the outcomes from that meeting, and so we've been working on doing that. And so these are the measures that will hopefully will put us in a better place if a recurrence happens.
Right. Thank you, Chair, for that.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you for your report and your action plan. When do you think you're going to get this all in place by? What is your timeline to get this done?
So the challenge here is the resource in terms of delivering and doing all of it. So there is the flood risk team is made up of one person, and so there are a number of things. So, for example, actually the website review and drafting has actually been done. So it's just a case now of proofreading it and then sending it on to the team to be updated, uploaded onto the website. So that'll be done quite shortly. Some of these measures, like I said, have been undertaken, and then there are a couple within here, like the enforcement. Is it's going to take as long as it takes. Ideally, we would have liked to have had it done by now, but we're probably looking at a couple more months in terms of going through the process and then getting legal involved if there is that need to take that forward. I mean, some of these enforcement issues are while we were originally looking at landowner, actually, one example, Thurrock Parkway is Network Rail erection offence. And therefore, actually, even if we said to the landowner you have to do it, they'd be breaking another law by going through this fence. So it's and then trying to enforce Network Rail is a different kettle of fish altogether than an individual landowner or business. So we are plugging away. It hasn't been forgotten. We are constantly reviewing it. We have some oversight as well. That with Councillor Hebb, we've been looking at that and to make sure we keep progressing with that. Ideally, we'd like to hopefully get this through by the end of this year. But again, it's an issue of resourcing with the one member in the team who's doing that. And there are quite some measures alongside the day-to-day stuff to take forward.
Okay, because I understand about the investigations and all about that. Will take a long time. Some of these are quick wins, but I'm very conscious that winter is coming, and I don't really want this borough to get in the same situation that it was, where Councillor Hebb's wall was underwater, with a yacht could have gone down the middle of it. So, and also we're sitting like Tilbury's a floodplain, parts of Purfleet are, all of these are at risks as well. So I know there's only one resource, but maybe we can sort out another resource to help you to get all of this in place really quickly, because I'm not sure how you would, what happens if it happened again, how quick we can get onto this. And unfortunately for those residents, fortunately for us, there wasn't many houses that was done, but you can't say that if that happened in Tilbury or back down there again.
I think one of the things is to probably take in mind. So I'm not trying to say is that actually the nature of this incident that occurred was not one that we could prevent, if that makes sense, because of how it took place. Like I said again, it wasn't a result of us letting our water courses just be overflowing and
No,
stopped.
totally get
there.
that.
So you know there is, and there almost certainly likely will be repeats of these incidents by completing all of the action. And I think that's something to be wary of. We are seeing wetter winters, and there, you know, it's that prolonged rain. We were lucky that there were only 3 internal flooding, of which 2 were actually quite remote in the borough. So I understand sort of like the point you're saying in terms of take this, and there are doing that. This is a lot more kind of providing that information and providing that additional understanding of where to go, what to do, how to prepare. I think one of the bigger challenges once we get through this is actually how we make residents more aware of how to prepare for flooding as well. It's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just worth noting as well, you know, that in terms of resource, we've had internal conversations about the need to look at the structure, how additional resource might be added into our internal structure to provide a bit more resilience. You know, again, it's worth noting that the flood risk officer post has provided focus. NAV is clearly very knowledgeable about flooding incidents, but having the flood risk officer in post as well has paid absolute dividends. And you know, you can see that with over £6 million worth of funding coming in. To a point, you end up being maybe a victim of your own success, because then you need the resource to be able to focus on those things, don't you? So we are aware, and we are looking at the need to bolster the structure to identify where we might get more you know, personnel in to help. Obviously, the problem is always how do you resource the resource? You know, how do you pay for extra? So any support that can be brought through the discussion with ONS would be great. But, you know, we are looking at how we can do that ourselves. So yeah, it's just a piece that we need to kind of look at in more detail.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm really conscious this year, it's been unprecedented with our weather as well, with climate change. So we've had not a summer, well, I don't think we've had a summer, whereas abroad has been in their 40s and going through the roof. So I think that's something that we possibly could think about in Council Head, like resources and...
Sure, officers will present something.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm looking through the action plan, and that's great. But I'm just thinking from the point of view, if I'm a resident now and I consider water rising, and I think my house is imminently in danger of being flooded, it seems to me all I can do is ring the council and tell them. There's nothing in here that says what's going to happen next. So what does happen next? I mean, is it just a case of, oh, okay, thank you for reporting it, and yeah, we'll note that, or does something happen that might help them? I mean, I think that, unless you've missed it, seems to be missing.
To some, at a case of imminence, that's where the colleagues from Ireland's team provide those sandbags to provide that immediate protection. Ultimately, there is don't have other measures to do that, and protection of your home sits the homeowner, and that is one of those aspects that we need to raise to make people more aware, to become more flood resilient.
I think that's fair enough to a degree, but we've already discussed that a lot of the reason, well, part of the reason why the flooding happens is because landowners are not clearing their drains and their ditches, etc. It would be nice if somewhere in the plan we could have a number that the resident could call where they can get sandbags. I mean, because not everybody's going to be prepared in the same way that, you know, we're not prepared for a freezing cold winter, except that we are with the salt. We can be equally prepared for this. At least there's a helpline number to ring where you can, right, I'm going to be flooded, where do I go?
Yeah, so that is part of the measuring in improving the website information about what to do and how you make that request.
Okay, that's great, thank you.
Okay, so are there any further questions or comments from? Doesn't like it. We'll move to the recommendation. I think. Yeah.
Come on. Committee, thank you for for letting me join your conversation. I think one of the things that I was quite clear on what Russ is very clear with me on, is that we did need to have a bit of a public discussion about the events, and we've seen that through. And I appreciate the team in front of us for the work that you've been doing behind the scenes to bring that conversation to this point. I think conversations like this are helpful because they help, provide sort of other contexts to a piece of work, and I think that could be really helpful. One thing I do want to say before I carry on is thank you to Julie Nelder, who on the day I think we exchanged many conversations, texts and frantic moments. I don't need to publicly say that, Julie, because it was a particularly difficult day, and I know you were supported by a lot of people who are probably around the table. I've been a member for 10 years, and I have never, ever seen a situation like that in the town that I live. That is the reason why I'm here, because the conversations that I was having on that day and subsequent, I'll reflect on one of the points just made here, of people being stressed, upset, anxious, understandably so. They're conversations that I never want to have again, because who would, and least of all the people would ever want to go through that again. And the one thing I think this piece of work is good. I think the one thing it doesn't underscore enough of is that this is a multi-agency approach. This cannot just be Thurrock in its entirety. We know that we've got challenges with accessing land that we've just talked about, going back on Councillor Snell's point. What can we do now? What doesn't help is when we've got other agencies not actively working against us, but infrastructure in place, which certainly doesn't help us snap our fingers and see things through. So I think we do need to recognise that. In terms of the grant funding, I think it's about 3 million allocated to us, isn't it? I think if we look at Wolf Road in Stamford Le Hope, you probably wouldn't have noticed, but we've recently had the underpass redone, including water catchment. And I think the technology we're talking about here will probably be something very similar. So you was worried about what does it look like? We've kind of already got some of that, I think. If I'm saying that I shouldn't do, you need to correct me. Because it intercepts the water from the flood table and then doses it back into the river. That's something that we've obviously been campaigning for nearly a decade, and the authority has seen that through, to which we're appreciative. But now obviously we need to push forward to try and avoid that happening to people in Belrive. You mentioned parts of Victoria, Barrett Close was underwater, Runnymede Road suffers terribly, Butts Road, the list can go on. I wanted to bring up mucking, and this is one of the primary reasons why I'm here. I suppose I'm asking for this committee to enable and equip us in the best possible way to go into bat for some necessary infrastructure upgrades. The committee would probably be aware of a committee called the Essex and Coastal Flood Committee. Did I get it right?
No, it's regional flood and coastal.
Nearly there. It's regional, it's just not. The point being is that is actually, whilst quite a discreet committee, it's actually quite a powerful body. And I think we've talked about mucking and the potential and further downstream in terms of the infrastructure which supports river flowing back upstream. But I do think that there is something that the committee could possibly do to sponsor our representative going to that committee, going into bat for the necessary infrastructure upgrades at mucking or further downstream. And basically, I would like to pitch that to you. I think if we can equip our delegate on that to go fully armed, going into that at the regional committee to make the point, I think we have to start a conversation somewhere. These are conversations that we've probably all had over a number of years. We haven't quite got it over the line of needing to. Well, now we've seen it. So it's just something I'd put forward. The enforcement, I think, we have to see that through. I don't believe for one moment there's any landowner that would actively ignore something with the thought of, ruining somebody's home. The fact remains is there are some areas that do need attention. We've already talked about that, and hopefully we can forge more constructive relationships where there are repeated conversations over a number of years, so it doesn't get to this situation again once that work's concluded. And just in terms of the website, I mentioned, Julie, at the start of my talk, who do we go to? Where do we go to? As a ward member for 10 years, I've never had this situation, and poor Julie got me on the end of the phone. And I think Councillor Snell's point and others is absolutely right. We do need a single point of contact, and I think that needs to extend to not just residents, but also public representatives. So I think there's possibly something that we can add into members' inductions when they join the authority. I think the staff, bear in mind there's a number of staff that actually live, and you know, some of us I think around the table who live in the borough. Perhaps we need to rebrief that to existing employees and so forth. I think that there's definitely an opportunity there. I think ultimately this is a conversation which shouldn't conclude tonight. You know, I'd probably recommend a repeat discussion at some point. You know, post winter. I suppose really that's my pitch. This was a particularly difficult period for Stamford West and others across the borough, and really I just wanted to convey the challenges that residents in my ward in particular struggled with that day, but to also recognise that there is some really great stuff coming out of here, that we could do with some sponsorship for that little bit more in a multi-agency fashion.
Thank you very much, Council Head. So I'm sure committee agrees with this, but I'm certainly keen to engage with yourself and officers on equipping appropriately our representative on the committee. That I won't even try and say that that's certainly something that we will look to do going forward. And as I say, I'll liaise with officers and members to work out how best to do that.
Could I just, we were talking about emergency drills earlier, which again is, you know, that shows the maturity of where we've got to in the last sort of 9 months. Do the drills incorporate residents feeding into that? The reason why I ask is because the question was just asked about, is there a phone number that's going to be published? Yes. The answer is yes. I suppose, do we want to do a bit of, what's it called, like a mystery shopper type thing to make sure that that is easily accessible? You're laughing at me because you know where it's coming from. Almost like a mystery shop. So if this does happen, anyone can find it just by Googling flood Thurrock or whatever. So I just wonder if I could have a little bit more detail on that, please.
I think so, mainly because obviously the way the website is structured, and particularly where flooding is on the website, you have to intimately know the website to know where to find the flooding. And I think it's designed to be done in such a way that you go straight into Google and search flooding, or you go straight on the council homepage and search flooding. But I think that once we've got that'd actually be quite useful to get some people to actually say, oh, I'm about to flood, you know, pretend one back, where do I find that information? And it actually, is it useful? Yeah, probably a good idea. And
I've probably got a few people who would, and I don't say that in jest, I've got people who would authentically want to do that to help us in this endeavour, because it frankly helps them. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further comments, we'll go to the recommendation on page 13, 1.1. I won't read it out, everyone can see it there. Are committee in agreement with recommendation 1.1?
Agreed.
Fantastic. So we will move on to the next agenda item, and that is the parking policy, strategy, parking design and development standards. This can be found on page 25. And I shall ask Nav again to introduce this report.
By the end of it, it will be. Thank you. So this is going to be a bit of a collaborative process. So I'll present the paper, but support for answer question come through. Phil and Lisa that are online, Matt and Matt as well. So they'll all be able to help answer some of the questions. So just kind of through the paper. So the council is in need of updating its parking strategy. The current parking strategy that exists is actually only specifically based around the management of car parks and enforcement, which was produced probably 5 years ago now. And so we are looking at producing and developing a approach that is in line with wider national and local policy and objectives, and that can form part of the local plan, so that we have an up-to-date parking strategy and adopted parking standards to help meet the needs of the borough and shape development proposals and ensuring homes and businesses are supported by the right level of parking provision, and that goes beyond just car parking, but all types of those. The parking policy and strategy document has been developed to assist the council to oversee the provision of parking across the borough, both currently and for the future. And as the borough looks to grow and incorporating new technologies that are coming around and the infrastructure that's needed to support that. It includes the overarching objectives and principles for how the council will manage parking demand in the future and how decision on parking arrangements will be taken. The design and development standards set out how parking requirements will be for new development and provides detail of the design and standards that are required. So that's inclusive of actually what the size of that parking bay should be, how we should provide a provision for blue badge holders, electric vehicle charging points, and measures that support those aspects. And it becomes an important tool for officers to use when in discussion with developers. And the parking enforcement strategy, it has been developed to set out processes for undertaking enforcement and also sets out the process that they follow in undertaking enforcement. The document, so ultimately it's made up of 3 different documents so the design standards and the enforcement going hand in hand with the actual policy document itself. And a 6-week consultation period has taken place for the documents in the latter end of 2020. And the responses that were received from that were generally supportive of the policies that were put forward in the document. And there was no outstanding views in there that sought to have the policies and the document changed. And then so as a result, there was no changes identified changing the policy document because of that. So.
Thank you for that, Nav. I've got a couple of issues with some of the things that I've read in some of these appendices. I'm going to go into one and then I'll throw it open to the committee, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion on this. And the first is with regard to the parking standards that can be found around pages 98, 100, 102, 104. On page 102, you've got houses with medium accessibility, and that's defined as being from within a kilometre walking distance of a designated town centre. Now, the spaces per dwelling there, we had a minimum of 1.5 to 2. I mean, when having discussions with residents in my ward, parking, as I'm sure you all know, is a massive issue at the moment, and that just seems, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that just seems like the absolute bare minimum. I mean, if we look at page 38, there's a table there that shows the growth in car ownership over the past 10 years, and you've got, you know, households with no cars not going up, basically remaining stagnant, and then you've got, you know, households with 3 cars going up by 30%. Car ownership is going up. I have discussions with residents who tell me, you know, they're in 3-bed houses, neighbours have 3, sometimes 4 cars. 1.5 to 2 spaces per dwelling for new developments does not seem like enough to me. Now, there are a number of other examples here. You've got houses low accessibility. I'm just choosing one for example. But am I wrong? Is that the bare minimum? Because I presume we take a lot from the National Planning Policy Framework. Is that the bare minimum? Is it unreasonable to want you know, more parking spaces than that? I understand you've got to put a number on it, but that just seems like a low one to me.
Thank you, Chair. I think just a qualifying question: is the standards just around the residential uses, or is it across the board for all the use classes that are proposed in the policy?
My primary concern is residential.
Pure residential, and it's around the medium, low, and high accessibility standards as a range. Okay. Yeah. So just to give you a bit of background with regards to this, we undertook a very extensive research through Chafford 100 as a viable research area for looking at how a development has evolved over a 20-year period based on various different policy points that were provided by government. So for context, prior to 2001, the council applied a minimum parking standard, and the majority of the residential dwellings in Chafford 100 on the eastern side saw a very high level of parking provision. And then post 2001 up to about 2013, the council was subject to what we call Planning and Policy Guidance 13, which was around transport, which applied a maximum parking standard, and the maximum standard was always 2, and that was a government policy. It was kind of like a race to the bottom for developers to try and reduce the level of parking demand by ironing it, like by working on providing a lower parking standard across the board. From that research we undertook, it was clearly identified that although the eastern part of Chafford 100 had a very high level of parking provision at the start, a lot of that relied on off-street parking provision and primarily garage spaces. And over time, the council saw a range of change of uses where people were extending over their driving spaces or converting their garages, and that resulted in quite a high level of on-street parking as a result. Conversely, if you look to the western part of Chafford 100, where the parking spaces were really tightened down, there was more on-street parking, there was more allocated parking spaces, rear parking courts and such. We identified that the level of parking actually remained quite consistent over that period, where there wasn't a decrease in parking provision for each of those properties, and therefore the on-street parking issues didn't really arise as what they did in the eastern part of the borough. Since 2013, PPG 13 has been removed as a policy statement, and the NPPF has kind of said a more reasonable approach to parking should be provided based on localised circumstances. And that's how this is developed, is that we've looked at a range of parking in 3 different scenarios for both flats and for houses to work on with the census data that's provided to provide the right mix in the right location rather than blindly applying a set standard across the board for a number of different scenarios. What I would draw your attention to is on page 39, you can see the car ownership figures for Thurrock from the 2011 census data. And I'll just pull out 2 examples for you. So Avon in Uplands, this is an area that's away from a train station, has got relatively good public transport provision, i.e. bus services. And you can see the level of car ownership in that area. So 4 cars or more per property, 2%, 3 cars, 6%, 2 cars, 27%, 1 car, 44%. So even though it's kind of away from the main transport links, away from town centres, the level of car ownership between 1 and 2 parking spaces is over 60, 70% of the overall provision in that area. If you look at another one, so let's look at Grays Riverside, you can see that the car ownership is again broadly consistent with the 1 to 2 car provision across the board. The census data actually identifies a mode of travel to work in the mornings as well. So when you look at people going to work, they fill the census data in and they identify what is their main trip generation. Is it car? Is it walking, cycling, public transport? And Grays Riverside was nearly 68% of people using public transport rather than using private car, and that kind of is reflective in the parking standards that's provided. Moving on from that, the standards have been looked at not only just on our own research area, but also taking into account the census data from 2011. Obviously, we've got the 2021 census, which came out this year. Hopefully, in the next 18 months or so, we should be getting the data back from that to see the level of car ownership. I appreciate, yes, from 2001 to 2011, there has been a steady increase in car ownership, but it's not necessarily at the level that you would expect to change the parking standards away from the 1 to 2 parking spaces provision that we currently see at the moment. And we do have to strike a balance with developers who obviously want to try and reduce the amount of car ownership for their sites, because that increases the density that they can get onto the sites. Because if they have to provide a parking space, they're not going to be able to provide the density that they would need to otherwise provide. Lastly, I would just say, looking at various sites around the borough, for example, members may be aware of the Schoolfield Road development, which was approved in 2008. That applied a rigid one space per unit provision across the board for 2, 3 and 4 bedroom properties. And one of the things we identified from that development was there's a very high level of on-street parking provision that actually overspills into the network. So what we've tried to do as part of these standards as well is to try and apply as much on-plot parking as possible. That, it basically enables people to park at their property rather than away from their property, but it also enables people to put things such as electric vehicle charging points on their properties as well, which allocated parking spaces wouldn't necessarily achieve. And we're also trying to gear developers away from providing garage spaces as a matter of course as well, because the temptation to convert those into habitable rooms, therefore displacing onto on street, is a big problem that we are facing as well. We're kind of looking at as a point of view of trying to find the right spaces in the right locations for the right property uses. Just to talk as well, where there is 4 or more bedrooms, we are saying you need to provide more parking. I know it says will be permitted, we're actually requiring it. We're saying if you're providing 4 or more bedrooms, you need to provide an additional parking space, because we know that there's going to be the propensity of people having more cars.
So when you say 4 more, is that 4 bedrooms?
4 bedrooms or more, yeah. So hopefully members can take a little bit more comfort from the fact that this is evidence-based. It's based on the census data. It's based on research that we've done in the borough rather than looking outside.
And just quickly on residential dwellings, flats, the high accessibility, but we have 0 to 1 spaces per dwelling. Do we need the 0? I mean, are we saying that there are circumstances in which we're happy for developers to build flats and not provide any parking, even if you're across the road from a train station?
There is the opportunities to go below 1 space per unit. We're kind of at a difficult situation at the moment because the local plan has not yet gone through its full process. There's mechanisms where we can seek to provide like car-free developments, where we can actually secure agreements with developers and future purchasers of properties where they would say that they wouldn't own a vehicle at that address. That's something that's seen in London. We wouldn't necessarily rigidly apply it here. We'd only apply it in very extreme set of circumstances. But what the 0 to 1 parking space provision enables is the development of things like car club. So one of the things that we've identified in research from around the country and from the government is people don't necessarily want to own a vehicle, they want to have access to a vehicle. And there's kind of this shift to more sustainable options in that respect. And this is kind of looking to the short-term future in the fact that if we can try and get more car club provision, then there's the opportunity that we could still provide people with access to the vehicle, but they don't necessarily need to own it. And that kind of fits in with the people that commute into London on the train, but may want to have a vehicle at the weekend, but don't necessarily want to own one, but again have access to it. So that's kind of looking at that for the short-term future. But it is based on the accessibility, and the high accessibility criteria is very, very strict in terms of where it is applied.
Right, okay. I can see a number of members wish to jump in here, so I'm going to go to members now. I'm going to start with Councillor Karen.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 questions from me. One, which is across both reports, which is talking about school parking. On page 56 and also on page 124. There's a lot about what the council expects schools to do in terms of parking, but I don't see a lot about what support the council can offer schools, because schools are primarily there to educate the children once they're being dropped off, either through walking, public transport or driving. And I'm not seeing a lot about what schools can do to what the council will do to help schools where there's, say, clashes with local residents because of the school run, and schools that are expanding and they weren't originally a three-form entry, but now they are, and it's and it's daily conflict with the school run. So what exactly is the council doing to support schools in areas where there's conflict with local residents, because in 10 years they've seen their roads clogged up because schools have expanded in line with population growth, government funding, all that sort of thing. It's more about, we expect schools to update their travel plans, but what's actually in place for schools?
Thank you, Chair. I think the parking standards for schools sets out a clear definition of what is expected in terms of the provision. One of the things that we have emphasised on is you need to provide adequate pick-up and drop-off facilities within the sites of the school, rather than the existing mantra, which is not my problem, it's a highway issue. We're expecting, if any school is proposed or any expansion to the school is proposed, they need to provide that facility. We are mindful that schools are quite constrained in some locations, so we are looking at measures with our education colleagues to try and come up with solutions in that respect. But in terms of operation-wise of the school, it is incumbent on the school to have a travel plan, to promote that travel plan, to try and reduce car-borne trips into those areas as much as possible. We have a road safety team that's under NAV that can assist schools into delivering that, and they've had some very good successful stories where schools have been very proactive and really looked into trying to reduce those car-borne trips. But really, we have to view through a planning sphere that if a school is being proposed in a certain area, they have to make sure that they comply with what they're required to comply with in terms of planning policy. And if they put in their transport assessment that they're modelling it on a certain respect, we will hold them to that account. And one of the mechanisms for that is the travel plan, and also the 106 route as well, if we identify any problem.
I mean, thanks for that. With sort of a brand new school, I think there is an element of, we now know how busy school runs are, but I'm just thinking sort of two schools for two different reasons. One in my own ward, like Belmont Castle, which was originally a one-form Stifford Primary down Parker Road. My own children's school, St Thomas of Canterbury, wasn't always down Ward Avenue, wasn't always a three-form entry school. Not really. So I can visualise both schools, and I'm thinking, where are these spaces where the schools are going to create drop-off points? And even if they did, like with Belmont Castle, you're still locking up the Parker Road, even if the school hadn't, even if it magicked up a bit of land. You've got to remember as well, staff parking at these places as well. Again, it just seems that it's if it's a brand new school that's being proposed, then an element of fair enough, put it where there's space, and envisage that you're going to be twice the size that you're starting off as. But for existing schools that are already in sort of quite cramped areas, again, it's kind of like the balance of it is. It is more of a highways issue, in my opinion, because it's about enforcing the roads nearby and things like that, and again, it seemed, again, from your answer, it was more of a, it's up to the school, we're going to hold them to account. But I think the balance lies more with the council supporting, in sort of my opinion, as a resident and a parent, I think, as well.
I think probably easier if I start on that, and then my enforcement colleagues might be able to help. So, in terms of there are increasing measures becoming available that we can look at. So, for example, school streets where we can potentially close the road from traffic coming up, and then work with the residents so that they're able to access and leave. And on some of those roads that might work. So we had an informal one over in Danon School,
Right, yeah.
where the entrance was a very, very narrow
It's just
road.
on, yes, one gate.
And the school worked with the residents to actually close that little cul-de-sac up, so that they could, and that actually worked quite well. COVID came and they had to change how they entered in that. But now the Department of Transport have provided the opportunities for actually putting in the appropriate orders to enable that. And it's about how we do that. I think some of the approaches that you're having with existing schools is that it's one of those processes of going one by one with the schools and engaging with them. There are some schools that are very, very engaging, want to be more sustainable and want to be a good neighbour and promote some of that stuff. Woodside Academy is a great example of a school that really engages with our road safety team, does the cycle training, pedestrian training, wants to be in there. There are some schools that don't want to know at all and will say, no, highways problem kind of thing. I think though that there are a large number of them having to go through those processes one by one and identify some of that. So some of the work that Matt's team does around Safer Routes to School programme as well, trying to improve the safety around schools and to try and minimise and manage that traffic impact. But there isn't always a solution. I think there's a number, and I think it'll probably be quite a lot of work to identify what each of those could be, because it's not a one.
Do you know, I think you're right. That's what I'm saying. I think there needs to be an approach of each individual school, because each school has traffic problems for different reasons. So like a faith school would have a wider catchment. That's the problem there. And some schools it might be because, thinking of Belmont Castle, because it's at the end of that long thin street, which adjourns London Road, one of the busiest roads, probably in the country at rush hour. So that's just what I want to see more of in here. More about how you're going to help each individual school, because you're right, one size, you're absolutely spot on there, that one size fits all won't work here.
And we do have actually great engagement with our schools. So Julie and the road safety team in particular has a lot of engagement with each of those schools. We have a team that goes in there to, cycle training is offered to every single child in the borough at year 6. And if you missed out, actually you can apply and we can provide it one-to-one for free, that kind of stuff. So we have that engagement. It's working with them to identify what measures that they need and how we can do that together. And then it is identifying actually how can that be implemented and some of those challenges that need to be overcome, from how it impacts other road users, etc. I think that cul-de-sac is probably a much easier solution to kind of overcome than one on a busy road where you're going to be impacting more than just the school going traffic, because that is also at the peak time in the mornings.
Thank you for that, and other colleagues might come on to that, I don't know. The other thing on page 52 about permits, and I've got a real sort of problem with the idea of at this moment in time charging more for parking permits, because firstly I think to say we're encouraging sustainability, it's lovely to encourage that, but I think public transport isn't invested in the same way and is nowhere near replacing car journeys for especially families who ferry their kids to here, there and everywhere at weekends and things like that, and evenings. I also think like the current economic climate is I don't know if I'm comfortable with another charge on people when you've got inflation up, taxes are going up, you've got furlough ending, and it's just, I think this is the wrong time to be levelling another charge on people. And it would, because when we're looking at the recommendations, we're asked to endorse 3 separate reports, and you've answered the school question ones and things like that, but I don't know if I'd be comfortable endorsing an extra charge on people just for owning a car they already have. And the first 2 permits to encourage a reduction in car ownership in line with sustainability policies, the council will consider introducing a charge for the first and second permit. So bang, within one go, people have got more charges to find money for, and it's money scarce at the moment. Just want to throw that I've really got an issue with that.
Do officers want to respond to that particular
It wasn't
point?
so much a question, I'd make more of a statement.
Yeah,
I was just expressing how I feel.
I think, Chair, maybe the enforcement team might be best placed to answer any around the parking permit.
Yeah, I'd be
charging.
really interested to hear it, yeah.
Have we got Phil on?
Yeah, I'm here. Evening, Chair. Evening, everybody. So the reality is, we that proposal was put together, and I understand that we're not charging for the first and second permit, but there is an increase on the third permit. Most boroughs do charge for the first and second permit, so that's just the reality of it.
Okay.
No, well, we're not those boroughs, and sorry, I should go for the chair. But just think we're not those boroughs, and also if they've had it in place for before the current economic climate, then you could say there was an element of it depends how long they've been in. But I'm just saying at this very moment in time, I think we've got the problem of the economic climate plus we're not compared. I'd like to know these boroughs in terms of what their public transport provision is, what amenities are close by, because Thurrock is, quite, a lot of the amenities are, you do need a car, especially, to get relatives and, children to all different things that people do. I think we need to look Thurrock-centric at this, and for Thurrock at this time, I can't endorse charging for the first and second permit just like that. It's just how I feel about it.
Councillor Snell?
Yeah, pretty much on the same subject, actually, Chair. If we go on to page 69, where we're talking about parking at railway stations, and it talks about encouraging people not to use their car to go to railway stations. Well, I'm sorry, that's not a situation that exists in the real world.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the permit situation, as I stated at the start of this meeting, I live in a PPA in Ockenden. The reason we got it is because people were driving to the station in such big numbers that we was coming home at night and there was no parking spaces there until everybody come home from work.
Yeah.
The reason they're driving to Ockenden is because it's cheaper to get a season ticket from Ockenden than it is to get one from Grays.
Yeah.
And this is going on all over the borough. So to make people that are living in a PPA pay for their ticket, whereas the only reason they've got one is because of people coming in from elsewhere to get to the train station, which no one's supposed to be using the car to get to, but everybody does. This is just the situation that actually exists in the real world. So to pretend that it doesn't is crazy. But we're talking about also in this strategy charging for emissions-based permit charges. I mean, charging for all different cars, and you've got levels up to whichever CO2 emissions you've got, and charging different levels per which car you've got. But there's a little caveat right at the bottom, because they want you to drive to electric vehicles. But there's a little caveat that says if there is no CO2 data output data available in general due to a vehicle's age, permit group 3 charges shall apply. Electric vehicles or emission-free vehicles could, at least initially, be exempt from permit charges. So that says, actually, no, until we've got everybody onto electric, we won't charge for it. But the minute you all go electric, we will.
Yeah.
And that's just more charges on top of people.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't the real world. People are not going to be going over to electric vehicles for quite a while yet. I mean, I know that's what the government's in 2030 now. We're supposed to be. That probably won't happen. There'll be a lot of petrol cars around for a lot longer. To drive around Thurrock, because you have to, the buses are not as good as everybody would like them to be, probably. The rail links are not fantastic. I mean, you can't go very easily from anywhere in Thurrock to anywhere else in Thurrock on the train, particularly easily. Buses the same. People don't want to use them. I mean, going back to the table about the car parking, you look at Grays Riverside and Grays Thurrock, the amount of cars that's up to 50% ownership of cars within easy walking distance of a train station. So it's pie in the sky to say, well, we don't want people to have cars. Well, they do. And you might well survey them and they say, oh, yeah, we're taking the train. On that journey they are, but they're using their car for everything else. They're using their car to go to Lakeside. They're using their car to go to their sports days, the weekend or whatever. So, you know, this is talking about a situation, by and large, doesn't actually exist yet.
I don't like disrupting the flow of conversation, but I do just want to briefly say that I think Councillor Snell is bang on. That was the second big issue I had reading this. The officers can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read this on page 61 as, you know, we're going to introduce a new tax. It says taxation class A, C, D, D. We're introducing a new tax on your vehicle that is not specified in this report. We're asked to endorse this, an unspecified tax on your car. Oh, and by the way, if you do what we want you to do and go over to electric, initially we're not going to charge you, but we're going to leave it as an option. So if officers can respond to what Councillor Snell has just said, apologies for interrupting that flow of discussion. If officers can respond to that, I don't know who, whether we want Phil or Matt or.
I think the silence says it all, Chair.
Well, I think just for my benefit, I think reading this myself, I've not really delved into this too much, but it does state on page 61 that it's to do with air quality, and the second paragraph says to mitigate this, Thurrock Council should look to implement a permit charging strategy related to vehicle emissions and electric vehicle EVs, as the ownership and use of these vehicles is increasing. Introducing a permit charging structure that seems to penalise high emission vehicles. We encourage either a modal shift to sustainable transport modes or encourage a shift to low polluting electric vehicles. So I would take that, members, as this is just something in the strategy for the council to look at in further detail down the line. By not putting in the strategy, it kind of precludes any further discussion on that until the strategy is updated again in 5-10 years' time. So it kind of just gives that opportunity for the council to explore it, but to provide more detail in the future to Cabinet and obviously to Overland Scrutiny on more of the detail. I think this is just, Table 9 says possible structure for emission-based permit charges. It's not necessarily that the council will implement this. It's more about just opens the opportunity for further debate and discussion on it.
I understand that, Matt. Unfortunately, though, as you just said there, the wording in this report is the council should. I don't think the council should. I wouldn't have a whole lot of issues if this wasn't explored for the next 5-10 years. To be honest, I know a lot of people disagree with that, but that's my position, and that's not something that I can or will endorse. I know there's further comments from members on this, and Councillor Watson has had a hand up for a while, so I'll let Councillor Watson come in now.
Thank you, Chair. So I completely echo both Councillor Perrin and Councillor Snell and the Chair's concerns around this. The other thing as well is we want to push towards like electric car points and things like that, but we haven't got enough of them in the borough as we are now. I've got residents actually asking me they want to go to electric cars, but they can't for the family because we haven't got enough points through parking and website. Probably borough. So that's going to work in terms of this. I think the Chair's completely right in terms of what the council should do. What you think you should do, I don't think you should be doing this. I can't also endorse this. Also, I've also noticed in there that Canterbury Parade is the only car park that is being charged at the moment, and I've got a suspicion that's because Councillor Snell said, because he lives in Ockenden as well as what I do, that he's over there all the time. No, that all the cars from the car park was parking into Canterbury Parade. So now we've just slapped a charge into that as well. So I know the utopia of is like, let's not have no cars and let's be very lean on this. Me and Councillor Kelly both sit in planning, and I would honestly say 95% of our planning permissions that come through, there's always an issue with parking, as in not enough. And that's one of our biggest concerns. And now we're going down to maybe going down even lower. I can't endorse a lot of these, especially around the charges. I really also don't think that we are not, I know other local London boroughs do this. We're not a local London borough. And I don't think we should be in the position that every time we ask a question, it's like other boroughs do it. I'm not really concerned about London, other boroughs. It's what's best for our residents and what we serve here. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, for Kelly was next.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. And I'm conscious that we've got quite a lot to get through tonight, and I think it's actually one of these items that we could spend quite a lot of time on, probably two hours, and probably still won't get to the core of it. But I certainly think it comes to the council with the best of intentions. I think it's good to see that we're looking at refreshing the standards. I agree with a lot of what's been said today, certainly being on the planning committee. I think a little bit of history, obviously in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, when houses were being built, cars were not really used, so that's how we find ourselves in this situation of controlled parking zones, etc. I think I do take slight issue with some of the newer stuff we're having coming through. I understand it. What's happening is we're desperately trying to build secondary schools, we're desperately trying to build more homes, but space is very expensive, so we're trying to cram as much in as we can, and that puts pressure on everyone. It puts pressure on councils, developers, and residents. I do think there's a little bit more scope. I think with Springhouse recently in Corringham, they came to us. It was about 94 units. I think it had about 4 visitor spaces, which we clearly wasn't happy about. We told them to go away, and they come back with an additional 20, and it had very limited impact, I think, on the development. So I think there is scope there. I think we've done well on that particular development, and that was important because we want to take away the pressure that these new estates have on roads. So I do think that standards can be increased, and I think it's something that needs more work. But also as well, Thames Park, you raised it with the schools. Obviously, a lot of these schools are 50, 60, 70 years old. Actually, Thames School, next to Palms that we approved recently, this was an issue because we wasn't actually happy with the layout, the parking. What happens is if you have a school where you have a drop-off point inside the car park, parents, they don't want to go in because they know they're going to have trouble getting out, so they just put up to the side of the road. And I think what happened was we approved it, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. I personally think we have some real problems on review, and that's, I think, the situation that we face on planning. So it's with respect that I won't be endorsing, or certainly not 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 about the charges. I was sort of on the fence about, so it would be interesting to see where that goes. But it's really just to look at what we've done at Springhouse, look at the standard, and look at how well and how well we've done with those additional spaces, and how much of a limited impact that had. You are correct with the other boroughs. I actually think they're making a mistake with some of the streets. I understand London is very, very dense, but not so much Essex. I think there's a lot of scope there. And then there's a couple of some real bizarre stuff in this document. I mean, it says here, what was it, car club that we're looking to introduce, page 70, it says 1 car club, takes away 20 private cars. I mean, that's simply, that's madness. Hopefully I'm wrong, maybe see some evidence of that in the future. So I'll keep it brief. I think, as I said, it comes with the best of intentions, but we've got some real problems on planning, and I think just a slight tweak here and there on the standard. I think we're almost there. I mean, the documents put together, I'd just like to see that increase. And Matt, you are right. Obviously, look, a developer is not really interested in spaces. They're doing as many homes as they can, and as many car parking spaces as they can get away with. I understand if I was a developer, I want to do the same thing, but I do think that on planning, we were told, look, you're supposed to improve good, sustainable developments, and unfortunately, we've got a problem with the car parking. So I don't think I've got too much more to add, unless there was unless anyone needs to pick up on the comments. 1 on the car club, 1 on what we've done recently with Springhouse, and 1 with Thames School.
I'm going to go to Matt and then Councillor Kerry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think to talk about the Springhouse development, just to put that into context, so when that was assessed, originally it was assessed as a medium accessible zone because it's close proximity to the town centre of Corringham. That required a range of parking between 1 and 1.5 spaces, and they come in with 1-for-1 parking with 4 visitor spaces, didn't they? Which is on the lower end of that bracket. So technically, it complied with the standard in that respect. Members were quite right to be critical of it, and they come back and they applied an additional 21 parking spaces. That actually still accords with this policy document in terms of that they uplifted their visitors and allocated provision which members will see on page 102, that there is, regardless of type and location, we apply 0.25 spaces to be provided unallocated or on streets for those developments. So that was well within the strategy that's laid before you with regards to it. But yes, I take on point the fact that members were able to compel the developer to do something that officers weren't able to do at the time.
Yeah, so just to pick up on that, because obviously you guys, you go on your standards as well. So I understand I almost understand the recommendation of approval. The only thing that worries me is had we rejected it, which we almost did, they could have gone to appeal, and in front of the inspector they would have turned around and said, this is the standard, this is the council standard, and they could have outmanoeuvred us, and I think that would have caused a problem. So for me, the standards is dangerously low. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. What I would say to you is that these standards we've been applying as a draft standard since 2012, and we have tested them at appeal as well, and we have won appeals against developers who have tried to put the lowest standard in as possible, and we've based it on the evidence that has been accumulated over the last decade. To inform how these standards are applied. But I appreciate where you're coming from with it. The other thing you mentioned
just a car club, which is
yeah.
new technology, and then potentially Thames as well.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, so car club basically, I understand your scepticism of removing 20 cars. Where the car club starts to come into its own is what the issue that members have picked up here is that the second, third, fourth car that is within a home. What a car club provides the opportunity for is that, and we know this through research, is that actually the more cars you have, the less used they are. So first car is your main cars used all the time, second, third, fourth cars become increasingly less used. What the car club provides is an opportunity to reduce an expenditure burden on households by having access to a new car at a low cost to use as you need, as opposed to needing to own a car. Or in your own right, and actually where you have a car that is using, doing less than 6,000 miles, and there are probably many cars that people own that aren't doing that. That's where having access to a vehicle that you can use that is within easy reach of your home can become financially better and easier for you to use, and that's where you start to see your benefit in that, and that's something that we're having engagement with new developments about, so that that can be provided, and trying to make sure that is not exclusively just for that development, but for other residents as well, so that they can benefit as well, who may need access to a car and who may not have one, or to reduce the need to own a car from a person perspective. If I had a car available, I wouldn't own one right now.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it goes. I sort of see where you're coming from, but I suppose where it's new, I suppose obviously there's going to be scepticism there. So, yeah, I appreciate the answers there. The only other two comments I'd have was I would like to see when planning is when we have a large housing complex, if you could have somewhere for delivery vans. Obviously, really increasingly popular now with Amazon, UPS, etc. I mean, you probably have around about 10 go up and down the road every day. And when these vans go into the new estates, there's literally nowhere for them to park. So I do think that's something that we could get ahead of the game on in our parking strategy. Whether we could look to, because obviously otherwise they're going to be parking on the corner or they're going to be parking in curbs. And then lastly, the only other comment I would have is obviously we're quite a heavy industrial constituency, which means a lot of our residents do work sort of days and nights. And again, that sort of puts a lot of pressure on them, because obviously public transport is not going to be as good as 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So again, I think that should be something that's noted going forward. So it's with respect, I think there's some good progress here. I won't be supporting those standards. It would generally be on the recommendation that there's more work to be done there on the points that have been raised. But it is good work, and it just needs to get tweaking. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go quickly.
No, it's going to be I just want to emphasise that we all want to be sustainable, but that we haven't got the electric charging points. We haven't got a tram system. We haven't got an underground. We haven't got a 24-hour bus network, and we have residents who, by virtue of just where their house is, live in a PPA area. So all without the infrastructure behind it, it becomes just a tax rather than. So for that reason, I want to make it clear I am very much in favour of making things sustainable, but it can only be sustainable if residents are backed with the infrastructure. So that's why I can't endorse this at the moment. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point really on that. I think the wider strategic view to the need for sustainable travel is part of the paper that's been put forward for the transport vision, transport strategy.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of sets out a lot of what we've been talking about here, things, you know, the whole package of things that need to be identified that will hopefully relieve pressure on the road network, encourage people to use other modes of travel. NAB's third report this evening is about bus service improvements. You know, and there's a real emphasis in trying to bring forward those enhancements on corridors so that public transport and bus in particular is seen as a real alternative. You know, we're looking at improving our walking and cycling network as well to encourage more people to use, you know, those options as a real alternative for travel for certain journeys. Bringing again different standards in that the government have asked for that will encourage and hopefully make those routes more accessible. I think it's a whole package of things, isn't it? And the transport strategy, the vision is that thing that kind of looks at the longer term requirement. Mass rapid transit is an element of that transport strategy that we need to consider. You know, over the local plan period as we deliver between 30 and 40,000 new homes. You know, the pressure that is going to put in terms of car journeys onto the network. We need to be looking at these alternatives, balanced with the fact that we're never going to get rid of all cars off the network. You know, even if they're all electric, there's still going to be cars on the network, aren't there? So, you know, or whatever comes after the electric car. But so I think, you know, it's worth noting that the transport strategy, the vision, looks at trying to bring all of this together. Parking strategy is part of the discussion. The BSIC work is part of that as well. And then there are other things like our walking cycling plan and other things that we're trying to bring together in that wider vision, wider strategy work to align with the local plan to identify how we can take pressure off the network. That's also then combined with the need for improved and enhanced infrastructure to accommodate pressures on the network as well. So, you know, it's a kind of more strategic view, I guess, in terms of bringing all of that together and balancing it all out as we move forward through our local plan period with the housing numbers that are going to be delivered and the pressure that will put on our network.
Councillor Watson.
Just really quickly, your transport strategy, is it ready or when is it ready?
It's being developed now.
How long do you think it will take?
We've got a transport strategy that is in place. We are looking to have the refreshed version, an interim transport strategy coming to you December.
Good, look forward to seeing it here then. Thank you.
Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to talk briefly about the EV charging issues. Members may recall in January this year there was a report with regards to set up a new policy and new budget line for EV charging provision within Thurrock, and the Cabinet resolved to approve a process for us to get a strategic partnership in so we can have a rollout of EV charging facilities across the borough on a demand-led approach over the next 15 years. We're currently in the tender process for that, so we're hopeful that by the end of this financial year we'll have someone in place to start delivering that infrastructure. In our ITV budget we've got around about 75,000 at the moment per year, and we can actually get grant funding from the government to provide another 75%. So in total, I think it's about 300,000 a year for infrastructure improvements across the borough. So, and I think the contract that we're working on is about 9 million over 15 years. So that's quite a lot of infrastructure that we're looking to apply over the next 15 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. I think that was a constructive discussion. I would just quickly echo Councillor Kelly's point that this is a big report, 3 appendices, quite chunky, and we've zeroed in on a handful of issues. This isn't an awful report by any means, but there are just one too many issues in here that and it looks
Yeah.
as though the committee can't endorse. But with that, we will go to the recommendations. They can be found on page 26. We'll start with recommendation 1.1. I won't read it out. It's there in front of everyone. All those in agreement with recommendation 1.1, I'll ask you to raise your hand. All those in disagreement? Recommendation 1.2, all those in agreement with recommendation 1.2? All those in disagreement with recommendation 1.2? 1.1, recommendation 1.3. Please raise your hand if you are in agreement with recommendation 1.3. All those in disagreement with recommendation 1.3. Right, we'll move on to the next item of the agenda. This is the procurement of fuel cards, and for this item, I think we've got Matt. Oh, apologies. Sarah. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sarah. Okay, so summary of procurement for fuel cards is the council require purchase fuel for vehicles. In order to operate our frontline services, they include our refuse vehicles, highways vehicles, house maintenance, road sweepers, minibuses, and also our plant equipment. Without that, we can't run the service. The current fuel contract was procured through procurement process with Crown Commercial Services in 2016, and that was for a 4-year contract with 2-year extension. And currently we are 17, nearly 18 months into the 2-year extension. So we're rapidly approaching the final end of that. So the current fleet that we have is 156 vehicles supporting the services, not limited to refuse collection, as I've just highlighted. And we have about 500 pieces of plant equipment, and that's not just handheld stuff, that's our tractors and road sweepers as well, to keep it very nice and clean. The vehicles run on standard diesel or petrol, and when necessary add blue, which is an additive of fuel into the diesel engines, all of which can be purchased on a fuel card. Currently, fuel purchases for the council is an approximate range of £900,000 a year. We know from our last tender process that there are a number of fuel card suppliers, and some of them are able to supply the UK, some are only able to supply small areas in the UK, so maybe just the South East, maybe just the North. The tender process determines those who are able to most effectively and efficiently provide our requirements for our day-to-day runnings. What we also specify in our tender process is that where we are currently based, we being the main environment department, we're based in St Clement's Way. Opposite us is a HGV fuel station. So when we go to tender, we have to specify that that particular fuel station is being able to be used on cards that we purchase. Otherwise, we've got to drive our 6 to the gallon lorries halfway around the borough to get diesel. Discounted rate for fuel is not offered to us. We get price per litre. It is cheaper than forecourt prices that members of the public pay, but not by a great deal, and it does fluctuate as well. And the fuel card station, the fuel card providers bunk their fuel into particular stations, but not all stations. So, for example, Morrison's, currently our fuel is bunked by our fuel card provider at Morrison's, so we pay a rate of £1 per litre, let's just say. Whereas if we was to use somewhere like Texaco in London Road, West Thurrock, our fuel card provider doesn't put fuel in there, but it accepts our fuel card, so we have to pay a higher pence per litre rate. That's just how it is. We have looked at bunking fuel on site. We don't get it any cheaper if we buy it in by 1,000 gallons. The cost for bunking fuel to get that infrastructure in place far outweighs the cost of just going to Tinder to purchase fuel cards. And we don't have any room in our site to put a fuel tank at the moment. We are tight space. What we would look at when we go to tender for fuel cards is what service is offered back office. At the moment, currently our service that we work with is an online portal. We're able to have all of our invoicing, our payments team. They go straight into the system. They can pay the invoices. We get weekly reports out of there where we can scrutinise fuel usage. We can identify possible fuel thefts just by looking at patterns. We can work out CO2. We can work out our fuel consumption of our vehicles. So what we currently receive is good. We would just need to make sure that whatever we receive in the future is also good and can also work and give us a great deal of information from the vehicles that we have. The alternative methods for procuring fuel after days, bunks, and although we've got long-term plans to move away from fossil fuels, we can't do that in the next year. That's just impractical. We would have a plan to look at changing the vehicles in time and looking at our alternative fuels then, but for now that isn't really an option. So hopefully, it says the services offered by the fuel card suppliers enables the council to manage and monitor our fuel purchases efficiently every year, and there's no hidden expenditure. So whatever our drivers buy, that's what we pay for. The only thing we would have to pay for is the fuel card, and at the moment they are at £6 a unit. We get them free. When we first signed up, we had to pay £6 per card, per vehicle or per person. When it comes around to then expiring, that's a free charge, but if they lose their card or damage their card and we have to reorder, that's £6. That goes straight onto the invoice bill, it's paid weekly. And that's it. That's about as simple as it gets.
No,
Yeah.
Thank you very much for
That's okay.
your summary of that report. I'll go straight to members of committee for any questions. Looks like we've whizzed through that one. That was how good you did. No, you've answered everything.
It says, can I talk, Chair?
Yeah.
Is do you buy from one company? I mean, it's just one company you buy from, and are there any alternative companies that you could?
So we don't necessarily buy our fuel from one company, but we buy from a fuel card provider.
Yeah.
So we are able to use at the moment fast fuel sites and Texaco sites. They accept our fuel cards, and then we're charged accordingly. That's referring back to bunking. So again, Morrison's is a fast fuel card provider. So fast fuel put their fuel into that station, and we pay it 3 or 4 pence a litre cheaper. Whereas the Texaco London Road isn't a fast fuel bunk site, but they still accept our card. So we buy their fuel effectively instead of buying our own fuel card providers' fuel.
Are there any other card service providers though?
Yeah, there are a number. There are a number. From recollection of the last tender, Barclays card was one that came up. That was quite good. It's just a credit card, but open to abuse, and their back office stuff was nowhere near what we get at the moment. There are a couple of other fuel card providers. The only thing that we struggle with is from the west of the borough. There are only 2 or 3 petrol stations over there, yet half of our service is over that way.
Okay.
So we have to be very particular about who do we choose, who can best serve that part of the borough and the rest of us. But ultimately, what's over there? And at the time, fast fuel were the ones that came out on top. They go out to Tesco's, which is at Pitsea. there's a station in London Road, Stamford, near the train station, and Jet then came on board, which is off, something like that. They came on board, so we had 3 fuel stations in Stamford. The other fuel card providers at the time didn't provide any fuel on the west side of the borough, so everything, including our ride on lawnmowers, would have to drive all the way to first point was Daynolds to get fuel to go all the way back. And by the time we've done that, we've run out of petrol again.
So you've chosen the best option.
Yeah,
there is not a better option.
No, at the time there wasn't a better option. No, but like I say, we're nearly 6 years in, so maybe things have changed.
Oh, how would we know? How would we find out?
That would go through tender process. So when we go out to tender, we specify: could you give us a fuel? First off, can you supply into Silwood's main fuel station outside our depot? If the answer is no, then they're out of the question.
Okay.
If the answer is yes, then it's great. What else can you provide for us? What other stations are in the Thurrock area? Then we have to look at what can we provide, or what can the fuel station card provide 20 miles out of our radius, because not all of our vehicles stay in our borough, they travel out. For example, our youth minibuses, they go off to the Peak District. So can they purchase fuel if they go up north? Where are they going to get that from? So we have to take all of that into account as well. But predominantly here, Thurrock is the main. What can you give us best value? And what is our smallest vehicle that has to drive on the road from the west? Where can they travel to practically without just driving backwards and forwards every day and being silly about it?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, the recommendation can be found on page 129, 1.1 and 1.2. I'm going to take both at the same time. Are members in agreement with recommendations 1.1 and 1.2?
Agreed.
The next item 8, A13 widening project, can be found on page 1 through 3. And it says Colin, but I think we've got Keith on the computer.
We have indeed. Hopefully you can. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can see and hear me. I'd like to introduce myself to start with. I'm Keith Rumsey. I'm the new interim Assistant Director for Regeneration and Place Delivery. I'm going to present the report on the A13 widening project and Stamford La Hope. So I'll just start with the key headlines, the progress headlines. Bearing in mind the report was to the end of July, so I'll verbally update on any significant issues as I go through. So on the A13, since the last report was presented, the progress on site has been very good. Horndon and Saffron bridges have been completed and open. Drainage and other earthworks and the verges are completed. Traffic switched to the verges to allow access to the central reservation, and works to install drainage and a vehicle restraint barrier completed ahead of programme. However, this isn't written in the report. There has been a problem with the for a section of the central barrier being set too low. This is being rectified. So there's been demolition occurred so far. We've removed about 50% of the defective work, and we'll be looking to replace that over the next few weeks, with hopefully finished by the end of October. So also both bridges at Alsett Cock Roundabout are completed. Traffic switched over, allowing the demolition of the 2 old bridges. Works are currently, the report says currently underway to realign the roundabout. I can now report that work is completed and work's finished in that area. So in kind of community, more than 12 million has been invested locally by using local suppliers and businesses within 10 miles of the project. This supports the local economy at a time when this is needed more than ever. On safety, there have been 850,000 hours since the last reportable incident, more than 1.3 million hours worked on the project in total. The project accident rate is currently 0, which is a significant achievement. On the schedule, report a much better position than last report, with a anticipated substantial completion, which is open for traffic towards the end of January, early February next year. And that's brought forward 2 months from the end of March, which was reported last time. So that's a significant improvement. In terms of the budget, I'm pleased to report that a deed of variation and settlement agreement has been agreed with the contractor. This gives us far more confidence moving forward. that was reported as of the end of 2020, including all COVID impacts up to then. Clearly, we've got the rest of the project to consider, but it still gives us greater confidence with the target price and the overall outturn. That's really the headlines. So I'm quite happy to take any questions up to now, unless there's any more detail that anyone would like me to go through on the report.
Thank you for the report, Keith. Just a quick one. I noticed there you mentioned we've got a substantial completion date of late January, early February.
Yeah.
The report says January 2022. Are we looking at January 2022 or possibly February?
Well, the section that the problematical section would probably affect the date by a week or two, so we could fall into February. But it's an uncertain area at the moment, so it's not absolutely precise.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let committee come in here now. Councillor Kerrin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, I think I am sort of rather shocked at how short the report is, considering the range of issues, how long this has been going on for. I mean, if you take away the the bit where the financial implications are explored and everything's signed off, it's basically a page and a half, and I can't share really the sort of upbeat nature of how everything is going well, because I've got the report in front of me from July last year, which said that the completion date will be autumn/winter 2021. Now it's January, but verbally February 2022. And when we consider, obviously, the original completion date was the 28th of October 2019. We're almost 2 years over that, with every report pushing it further and further. And I wouldn't be surprised if we were sat here at PTR in February, finding out it's going further in. And also the money. There's nothing here about how much this is costing. The last figure I've got is from July 2020, which was let's round it, 115 million. Where's the update? Do we know as of this moment how much it's projected to cost?
Those numbers are currently being scrutinised, but we don't wish to push them in the public at the moment because we still have compensation events to negotiate with the contractor.
Well, how many compensation events have there been? Because as of July 2020, there was 711 compensation events, and do we know as of now how many, what figure is there now for compensation events?
I don't have that figure in front of me, but I'm sure I can make that available. The context of the report is to provide a progress report since the last report, and not to delve into the history. I've been with the council 3 weeks, therefore I don't have any insight into the history. I know what I've adopted, and I'm trying to concentrate on the current and the future.
No, I totally get that with yourself, sir, having just been in post, but I just wonder what the sort of handover was to you from this project, because it's been going on for a long time now, and I would have expected, it's not history to sort of to know how much it's costing as of now, because I know you said the figure's been worked out, but when we consider the original budget was 79 million, say, round it up, and then the last time we heard it was 115 million. I think it's sort of fair for us, as we're not just councillors here, we're local residents who all live in Thurrock. I don't think it's sort of unreasonable to have a figure as of now that it's expected to cost. And if as you say, you've only been in the job 3 weeks, I'm not holding you personally. So what I'm saying is, when sort of the last senior officer handed the project over to you, did they not say that how much it is as of now? Because I think this is information that we sort of deserve as councillors, but also more importantly, residents.
Yeah, those numbers are known, but could fluctuate with the conclusion of compensation events and the next few months. Obviously, another few key months to go till the end of the project. Sorry. I'll take advice on when that could be made available.
Yeah, just because, as I say, it's considering the. So am I allowed to carry on there, Chair? I've just, because considering the amount of overspend, the amount of time this is over, not over time, just over budget, but over time. I just think really, like if I do this, that's the report, and I don't really know what to say. I don't know what other councillors think around the table, but this is, the rest of it is all about the, you know, the signed off by legal, signed off, you know, the bits we have in our reports. This is essentially what we've got on a project which is currently 2 years over completion, and at last count, 36 million over budget the last time we heard about it. And I don't think this really sort of tells us anything, to be honest.
Councillor Snell,
yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you for the report. Partly would like to agree with Councillor Kerrin is that, you know, again, I know you've only been in the job for 3 weeks, but I think that by the sounds of things, committee have been blustered along for quite a while now, and I think at some point the figures are going to have to come to the forefront, and we're going to have to know what they are. In terms of these incidents we're talking about, I noticed this morning actually that the barrier, which did appear to be complete just last week, has now been demolished. Is that a compensation event? I mean, how does that happen? I mean, this is that bad design, or is it incompetent? What's the reason for that? Do we know?
Yeah, we're looking at the full attribution. It's a design element by the contractor, but it was based on some information in the invitation to tender, which was done by another designer. So it seems black and white, but could get quite difficult to prove.
So this is yet another thing which could delay the process of getting the road finally opened, I suppose.
It's had a minor impact on the schedule, but not substantive, which is why I mentioned about early February.
Okay, well, we'll have to see what happens come early February, but I don't think many of us here have got an awful lot of confidence. But anyway, thank you for your answer.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Thank you for your 2-page report. And I do understand as well and recognise that you've just been into the position. I think you're probably number 3 or 4 that's been doing this right now. So I really get that. In terms of, I echo everybody probably around this table that have been speaking, and we have got concerns going with day 13 because we have been told on numerous occasions this is a really good thing to happen, and we're nearly 2 years over with a budget of, at the last count, 32 million and climbing. I'll be really interested where that overspend and where we're going to get that from in terms of money wise, but also as a resident, the A13 is a bit of a lifeline for me going in that direction, as most of my family are like in Southend and places like that, London. And every weekend it's closed that backs up back into Thurrock. And it must be such a pain if you live in Alsett and around that sort of area. How many more times are we going to have this closed while work's being carried on up until the end of February?
Yeah, there are three more planned closures before the end of the project.
3 more.
Yeah.
So can I please suggest, Chair, can we have, every time we have a meeting like this meeting, we have a report back on the A13, how it's progressing up until the end of February?
Yeah, so I think what the feeling of committee is today is that this is a report that could have been more meatier, to say the least. It's something that, you know, I noticed when reading this. It's not the longest, most detailed report, and we've got 2 more. I think it's 2 more meetings of the municipal year, one in December and one in February, I think, as we're slated to finish. So no problems from me with that. I'll let Keith respond though to if you wish, to anything Councillor Watson has just said before we move on.
No, nothing to add. I mean, if we can certainly provide more frequent reports as we get nearer the conclusion of the project. Obviously, there are many risks, I'm sure we're aware, as we now move through winter and construction. So I can advise of the situation periodically.
Councillor Kerrin.
Thank you, Chair. And I've been on this committee for almost my time on the council. So obviously, you've been involved 3 weeks, but my frustration here is coming from, the amount, when I prepare for these meetings, I look back over the things I've said about the project previously, and, it just, we want it done, but we need to know how much it's going to cost and who's going to pay. And the last time we had a substantial discussion on this was in February of this year. And at the time, I put forward a recommendation that we request that Cabinet commission an LGA peer review into the A13 widening project. And I would like to put that recommendation again tonight and see if we have more luck with the current composition of the committee. I think only myself, you, Chair, and I think yourself, Vice Chair, were at that meeting, and some weren't councillors and others were not on this committee. So I'd like to try again to put it forward as a recommendation that we request that Cabinet commission an LGA peer review into the A13 widening project. And I would just urge members around this committee to endorse the recommendation. Well, obviously I need someone to second it. I hope Councillor Watson will. And I'd really like to urge you all to support it, and let's ask Cabinet to really, we need to learn from this. Whenever the review comes, if it starts before the completion, or as these things take time, hopefully the project will be completed soon, but I've been hearing it for the last 3 or 4 years that I've been on this committee. So I don't know if Democratic Services got the wording that I've said. So I'd like to propose a recommendation. Councillor Watson has kindly seconded, and let's hopefully get agreement that we can, we want this reviewed, and because it can never happen again the way this project has gone.
Before we move on to recommendations, are there any further comments or questions from members of the committee?
Sorry, can I just ask that the future reports that we have a breakdown of cost today and what the projected cost is, because you've got a target cost for the scheme in there, so it would be good to know what that actually means and where the funding is actually coming from, please. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. In terms of an LGA review, I voted against that recommendation when it came to the committee Councillor Kerrin's referring to. I'll be voting the same way today. In terms of an LGA review, like Councillor Kerrin says, that will take time, and it also costs money, I understand. He's right that lessons need to be learned, and as reports come forward to ONS in the future, members will have further opportunity to scrutinise those, and post completion of the project as well. But that, I just want to make clear my position on that. If any other member wishes to do so, that they're welcome to do so before I go to the recommend. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. So I'm going to vote for the LGA peer review. I feel that the money that it will cost will be a drop in the ocean in comparison to the money that has already been spent on the A13. And as residents and also councillors, I think we've got a duty of care to find out what has actually happened with these costs and where they're going to be funded from. So that's my point. Thank you.
Are there any further comments or questions from Missy? Shaking heads, no. Okay, so we'll first go to recommendation 1.1 that's already on the page, just to note and comment. I think we've done that. Still ask, are we agreed? Yeah, agreed. Could Democratic Services just set out the wording of Councillor Kerrin's
Yeah, Chair, how many is going to be voting for this? Because if there's not enough votes, then it won't really go as they recommend.
I think we vote on whether to.
Yeah, so basically, it's for Scrutiny to commission the LJ peer review into the A13 and to learn from the A13 project.
So I'll just have to.
That's it, yeah.
An LGA
Okay, just
into the project.
the rest of that bit will be minuted.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, if Councillor Kerrin is happy with that wording, then all those in favour of the recommendation? I'll ask all those not in favour of the recommendation to raise hands. We will move on to the next report then, which is the Stamford Hope Interchange Report. This can be found on page 137. And I think we're going back to Keith.
Indeed. Thank you very much. So on Stamford Hope, I'll just again go through the project progress headlines. So following full planning approval in July 21, concept design for phase 1 is now fully developed. It's been reviewed and the principles accepted by key stakeholders. Invitation to tender to 4 companies for a design and construct contract, which takes us from concept to full detail, has been issued on the 16th of September this year. The return is planned in December with award and start of design in March next year. So the phase 2 transport hub, which is the bus turnaround and other transport facilities, the scheme is currently under review so we align objectives with bigger planning aspirations and placemaking opportunities. The concept design is undergoing further investigation and pre-planning advice. And there was a number of workshops with key stakeholders to conclude that piece of work. Project steering groups continuing to meet monthly, and again, engagement with stakeholders and feedback has been very positive to what's proposed thus far. So on budget, there's been a number of budget exercises and cost certainty exercises undertaken throughout the period. Again, I don't want at this stage to make budgets made publicly available because we're out to tender, and that would certainly compromise the competitiveness of the bids that we would receive. On schedule, we now have a detailed schedule. I'll just give you some of the headlines of the short term on the entire project for phase 1, and phase 2 is likely to start immediately after phase 1, because at the moment the current assumption is that we need for laydown area for phase 1 the area that would occupy phase 2. If that assumption obviously is not valid and we come up with a different construction methodology, then clearly we can accelerate phase 2 before that. So that's really the headlines. Again, happy to accept any questions.
Again, on this one, I'm going to go straight to Mr. Councillor Kerrin.
Thank you. And obviously taking into account what you said, the context of how long you've been in the job, but I would note again, this is it, on a project which again has been a key part of my tenure on this committee. It's in fact, I think the A13 and Stamford are competing with the fuel cards on which report can be the shortest. And I kind of understand with the fuel cards, because we're not talking about original budgets of 20 million. We're not talking about purchasing daybreak windows. And now we don't know if, I'm going to ask a question on that in a moment about whether we're even using that land now that was purchased separate to the original genesis of the project. But all I would say is in July 2020, when I sat in this committee, we were told there's no delays with the programme and the completion date is August 2021. So obviously we've gone past that. First question, when is this going to be completed?
When you say it, do you mean phase 1, phase 2, or together?
All of it. whichever phase. I mean, it was originally one project, then it was a phase one, and originally last year we were told, oh, it's all on time now because it's almost in essence a new project because of the purchasing of like the daybreak windows. Let's say, okay, phase one, when will that be complete? When will phase two be complete? And ultimately, when will it be complete to the extent that people in Stamford-le-Hope, know it's done and there's no more work going on?
Okay, well, we're looking at a March 22. This is indicative only, of course, because it's subject to tender and compliance and many risks. But we're looking at a March 22 site preparation and enabling works, with the phase one works commencing in around September 22, with a completion around December 23. Phase two, as I said, would start directly after that, but the key assumption is whether we can actually do the two concurrently. So that's still work to be developed.
Thanks for, I'm glad to have that information. It's kind of, I think if it had been in the report, I might not have looked so shocked because I could have got it out of my system whilst preparing for this, but December 2023. Okay. And, okay, while we're getting these answers, what do we anticipate the final budget to be by the amount of spending we'd have had to have done on this to get this done? What are we thinking?
Well, then again, I don't wish to make those numbers publicly available, so we're out for tender at the moment, and that would compromise the integrity of the tender potentially. And
am I to carry on, Chair? Yeah, thank you. And in terms of the Daybreak Windows site that was purchased for £4 million, is that going to be, in the end, is it going to be an integral part of the Stamford-le-Hope interchange, or is it going to just be another housing development?
My understanding is it will be part of the transport hub at the moment as the design stands, but as I said, the whole design is due to be reviewed to make sure that all objectives are aligned.
Okay. I think I need to digest some of this. I'll hand over to other councillors.
Yeah. Want to make a comment? Are there any other councillors who wish to support them?
Thank you for your report. Can we see going forward a high level programme with the milestones on what we're looking at going through? And if I can ask Chair again, it's same with the A13, is it possible that after the tender exercise is gone out, which is 17th of September, then maybe November time, or when our next one, and then February, we can have an update on this as well, on what the tender process is, then the company should be locked in and we can have an idea what the budget is? Is that okay? Yeah? Is that okay with you?
Keith, do you want to come back on that?
I'll certainly know, we have no problem on highlighting milestones. Again, I'll have to take advice on the sensitivity of commercial information. But we can certainly disclose what's not going to be compromised in the public domain.
So if you want to know due tender?
That we've gone, I'm not sure if we've gone through that because it's through, sorry, I can't answer that one. I don't know. Right,
okay, so if we didn't, by February, you should definitely have somebody in place.
That's the plan, yeah.
So by February then, can we see the actual cost against spend of what we're looking at doing against your programme and milestones, please?
Okay.
Also, to add on to what Councillor Watson said, by February, because I'm thinking last meeting of of the cycle, will we know for certain whether the Daybreak Windows site is still an integral part of the project by then? Will we know whether it's going to be used?
I've not had visibility of the design yet in the short time I've been here, so I can't answer that specifically, but I'll look at that and get back with a response.
Do we have any other hands from? No. I will just echo Councillor Kerrin's point with regard to the length of report again. you know, it could be more substantial. And as I say, there's nothing that stops further reports coming in the municipal year if that's committee's will. What I would say to Keith is, if this helps, we can use pink papers. We can go into exempt session if that's something that officers would advise. Then that's something I'm happy to do. We can go into exempt session and you know, stop live streaming, etc., etc. Sensitive information won't appear in the minutes. So there is that option. I mean, I can't sit here and say, you know, that I'm particularly impressed with a sort of final finish date of December 2023. In an ideal world, you know, it would have finished on time. What I would say is, I do think it's a positive that we have a timeline now. I mean, for what is it, over 2 years, people in Stamford have been using the station as is at the moment, and you know, it's not on. I use it, and it's not right that the people in Stamford are using the station in the condition that it is. So I do think it's a positive that we've got a sort of commencement date and a timeline that we can hold officers to. But I'm not sitting here with a massive smile on my face, I have to say. But you know, unless there are any further comments, we'll just go to our recommendation, which again is Councillor Kerrin.
I'll just say, please, for future reports, we need to have information like this up front about projected completion dates and things like that, because it's just, I don't think it's acceptable to just obviously we get reports and then we probe further and get additional information. And like the report earlier that yourself, you know, with the flooding, you spoke a lot, and there were things which maybe you said that weren't just in the report, things like that. But to have a page and a bit, and then to be hit with the bombshell of December 2023, I just think we all work on this committee, we all read our papers in advance, and we need to have all that information in advance so we can prepare accordingly, because otherwise we can't represent our residents and properly if we're finding out sort of bombshell information like that on this night. I appreciate the fact you've told us, because it would have been worse for you to have just said we don't, you know, we can't reveal that, because I'd have just probed even more. But we need it in advance. But going forward,
yeah, but better prepared reports with more information is what committee's looking for. I appreciate Keith has only been in post for a few weeks. But obviously at next committee it will have been a few months. So hopefully we can see a bit more progress in the rest of the municipal year. But time is moving, so I'm going to go to recommendation 1.1 on page 137 to again note and comment. Is committee agreed with recommendation 1.1?
Agreed, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to item 10, which is the bus service improvement plan. It can be found on page 141, and I believe it's Nad's last report of the night.
Thank you, Chair. So the bus service improvement plan, you know, we worked on it in the 5 months, is so I've got to put it in context first. Earlier this year, the Department of Transport, and by Department of Transport, the Office of the Prime Minister, published a new national bus strategy. It's the first national bus strategy I've done in a very, very long time. And it basically sets out a path for local authorities having a greater say in the way bus services and bus provision is delivered. So it basically takes us back to the point from when deregulation of the bus industry occurred in the 80s, I believe, where it's looking to not rectify but change the course in the way bus service. So since then, bus service provision has predominantly been delivered for profit. And therefore, where private industry has come in, they have potentially run bus services where they're going to make the money, and they're not really running them where they're not making money, which any reasonable business would do. And over time, bus services which have been delivered for social need by authorities have decreased, where funding has also been decreased. The National Bus Strategy ultimately sets out a programme where the government wishes buses to be demystified, i.e. more easily accessible for more people, to be cheaper, better integrated with other forms of transport, and to ultimately be up there in that first choice of what transport mode you use when you're walking, cycling, using a bus, and then using a car later. Within that strategy, the local transport authority, in this case Thurrock Council, have been given some options in terms of which route to take. So two opportunities were put forward to the council to choose. So the first one was to develop an enhanced partnership, which has existed in legislation, but not many authorities have been able to take forward. And now the government are basically pushing every authority to go forward with one of these two routes. Enhanced partnership is almost like a stakeholder-based approach to bus service provision. That is, the local authority has the coordinating role. All operators that operate within the area are key stakeholders, and they have to work hand in hand with the authority and other stakeholders, which also include the passengers and other key parties. And so within that, there is a process where the routes shouldn't just be run because that's the most profitable and you all compete against it, and the authority works to have those routes better distributed. The other option was to undertake franchising, i.e. the way in which buses are delivered in London, and therefore they are all basically owned by the authority, and then they go out for people to run those services, or they procure them. Hence why a lot of this comes refers back to it taken a lot from Boris Johnson time as Mayor of London, his approach that we want to deliver beyond that and make buses more used across the whole of England, and that's where the strategy really covers. Whether or not we chose to undertake franchising, every authority had to first go down an enhanced partnership route, and then you do the franchising. In collaboration with the portfolio holder of transport, it was decided that franchising would not be a suitable approach for the authority. It would just be too much for us to take on, and we can still reverse that course if we chose to, but it's unlikely. The only people who are undertaking franchising are combined mayoral authorities, and ultimately in the legislation they're the only people who can. We would have to seek dispensation from Secretary of State to undertake franchising. That we had to publish a notice of intent to undertake an enhanced partnership at the end of June of this year. So we didn't have a particularly very long process. The next stage, which is what I'm here to discuss today, is the bus service improvement plan. And that is the next stage of rigid timelines that the Department of Transport have set in this whole process under the National Bus Strategy. The BSIP, as it is easier to call, is a high-level document that we will use to bid for improvements to central government to enhance bus services. There is a £3 billion pot of money. That's not necessarily all exclusively for bus use. I think that some of that is recycling as well. But out of that money, and without the BSIP, we cannot bid for that money. So ultimately, it's the document that we need to use to put to central government to say we want to put it. And therefore, if it's not in the BSIP, we can't really do that. So we have to submit that BSIP to central government by the 31st of October of this year, and it has to be published on the council's website as well. Following the publication of BSIP, once that is done, we then have to deliver the actual enhanced partnership, which is the agreement, the legal agreement between all the stakeholders to deliver improved bus services, and that also includes a passenger charter and that has to be delivered by the end of March. So once we get through this process, we will start working on the enhanced partnership. Within the BSIP itself, what we have done is we have worked up what are the immediate priorities we think we need to focus on to enhance bus services within the borough. And we have to work with all bus service providers, so that also includes TfL and first services that run across the borough boundary. So regardless of whether it's our service or not, if it's in our borough, we have to work with them. The key things that we put in there are enhancing frequency of existing bus services. So some of those may be commercial, some of those are the 3 services that we currently pay for. So particularly the rural services which we have, and I can't remember the service numbers, it is, trying to make sure that we provide hourly or half-hourly service where currently they might be every 90 minutes, every 3 hours, or running every other day. Where there may not be the demand to run a bus service, because actually running buses is quite expensive. We're looking in the region of £140,000 per bus per year, cost of running a bus. We are looking at innovative measures such as, could we make use of taxis to run as a bus service? So that is, if rather than using a 14, 16-seater bus, you have a much smaller vehicle. They run to timetable, they run to bus stop, they run basically exactly like a bus does, but it's not a bus. And that can produce significant savings over running a bus that might not necessarily be full all day long. Some of those measures are looking at how we improve the reliability of bus services. So this BSIP has been produced in collaboration with the bus operators, in particular First Bus, Enzyme Bus and Nibs/Stevenson's buses, who are our contracted service provider, and identifying with them actually where they've identified issues, what they would need to have improvements made. So there's nothing in here saying we are going to implement this infrastructure change. It's about seeking funding from the government to explore what could be implemented, what is needed, and then being able to bring that to make a more informed decision. And then there are some easier measures, such as implementing enhanced information. So improving the timetable or improving the way timetable information is provided, providing enhanced real-time passenger information, providing the on-bus information services, so it tells you which stop you're at, that kind of stuff. And making buses more attractive, USB charging for passengers to use. One of the measures we've included is actually funding to help promote the use of the bus. I think one of the challenges is that we actually probably do have a very good bus service. People don't realise it enough because they don't use it enough to understand that. Some of that is investigating how we can improve and reduce fares. So, for example, you have to change from one service provider to another to get to where you need. Actually, can we have an integrated ticket that is of one fare or fare capping, as opposed to having to constantly pay additional fees? And that's something our public engagement has identified. On that, we did undertake public engagement. We had actually a very good response. I think one of the best I've ever had in terms of working council. And we were able to actually split that public engagement between users and people who didn't classify themselves as users. And you get some interesting comparisons between how they perceive bus use. Actually, regardless of the user type, there was very relatively positive perception of buses in the borough, in that they were reliable, they were good. I think little things like safety kind of came up in the sense that actually bus users didn't feel buses were unsafe. And the comments that came out were very much off the time of the pandemic, people not wearing their masks, as opposed to I felt unsafe, that something was going to happen to me on the bus or using the bus, getting the bus. Whereas on those who didn't use it had a greater sense of antisocial behaviour, particularly around the end of school time. etc. But even then, there wasn't significant numbers in those kind of responses. But it also provided us an opportunity to engage with those people when this BSIP is published, to let them know that it is going to be published, but also it allowed us to ask them if they wanted to be engaged through the development of the transport strategy, to engage in future transport projects and get their views and thoughts, because actually we do struggle to get that information. The other side of the public engagement, which we did, and it will be an ongoing live process, is having a mapping-based tool where people can log the improvements that they need or that they feel are required, so that it gives us an ongoing way of recording where we might want to concentrate in the future. Often we find that you get sporadic emails from here and there, whereas we can direct everyone to say, log it on there. You can actually log it by precisely where you mean as well, rather than having to interpret where that is. You can put in a series of pins, you can expand on that thought, and it also gives other people an opportunity to also discuss and add to that. We've done likewise with walking and cycling as well, where we've said, actually, tell us where you want an improvement, be that from the end of your house to the main road, or do you need a full route, etc. So the BSIP has been developed to do that. We have had a relatively short period of time to pull it together and get it through this process, and we'll have still a short period of time to do the next stage with the enhanced partnership by the end of the financial year. There are implications for the authority for not delivering the BSIP on time. Whether that's real or just a threat by the government, it says very much that if you do not deliver these aspects, the authority and the bus operators may be at risk of losing their funding. So all bus operators are supported by a grant, even if they are commercially run services. The authority is supported by grants to run the services. And also, in particular, at the moment, under the COVID situation, under the pandemic, a lot of these bus services are not running anywhere close to the level that they were previously, and patronage is down. There's a diagram within the BSIP itself of where patronage is by first and enzyme bus, and that could have significant consequences, because if those subsidies are cut, that would see a loss potentially of the existing commercial services that we had, because it just no longer becomes viable for those operators to provide.
Thank you for your report. Now, before I go to committee, we're coming up to 2.5 hours, so I'd like to move a motion without notice to suspend council procedure 11.1 to allow the meeting to conclude the last couple of items. Is everyone in agreement?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Councillor Snell.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I noticed on page 190, when you're talking about the public engagement, if what you've written there is correct, after massive public engagement, you've got a total of 100 responses. According to that, you got 84 respondents via email and 16 submitted the thing by email and via post. So 84 the portal and 16 by email or post. 100 people. That sort of tends to render every statistic you've got on there statistically irrelevant, because there's not enough people taking part. Now, that's a by the by. The figures just become nonsense if it's just 100 people. It's not representative. Secondly, I don't get on a bus. I wouldn't get on a bus. Now, there's a reason I do that. Before I passed my driving test in the 1980s, bus services then were a lot better than they are now. And the reason I don't get on a bus and wouldn't get on a bus is because one particular day I was waiting for a bus, it snowed, I got completely soaking wet, covered in snow, hated it. What on earth am I doing? I need it to get like this. Can't wait to pass my driving test, and apart from the odd occasion when I've got no choice, I've never got on a bus. The people you see on a bus tend to be people that don't have a car. And you've got to try and take those people out of their cars onto a bus. And ironically, looking at the page 163, when you're looking at bus usage, the low bus patronage is reflected by relatively high car usage. Well, Kelsey Crees. This isn't London. I know this is one of Boris's pet projects, but frankly, he's lost the plot. Now, I don't think in a place like Thurrock, if you happen to pay the bus company subsidies to run a bus route, then it's not viable. It's not viable because not enough people want to use the bus. Now, I suppose you could say if you pay enough money to run a bus every 10 minutes, you might encourage a few more people to use the bus. But I don't see that happening. Your own figures show that given a choice between using the bus or not using the bus, people would not use the bus. I don't use a bus to go to Lakeside. I could use a bus to go to Lakeside. I would never use a bus to go to Lakeside. And I would suggest that everybody in Thurrock that's got a car would never use a bus to go to Lakeside. So this seems to me a policy, I know it isn't the council's policy, of basically trying to chuck enough money at somebody to put in enough bus services to try and persuade somebody to use a bus. I don't see it happening. I think it's pie in the sky.
The only point I'd like to make is that only all but 3 of the bus services in the borough are commercial.
And there's the answer to the problem.
So
in fact, and that's exactly the point, isn't it? They're commercially viable. Only 3 of them in the entire borough.
no. With the exception of 3.
All but 3.
All the others are commercially viable bus services. So we only provide subsidy to 3 bus services,
Okay.
which are the ones that provide services to all communities.
Okay, but you want to get the rest of the people that are on this graph on page 163, which is the colour map of bus usage, or there's big chunks of greater than 60% of people travelling all by car. You're not going to persuade those people, are you? Is that the aim, to get a chunk of those people to give up their car and go on the bus?
I think there is always an aim of trying to encourage more people to travel sustainably via active and sustainable modes. And provided, I think it's providing the opportunity for more people to use the bus. And what you've identified are some of the barriers that people have to using the bus. And it goes to a chicken and egg. You either have to provide more services for more people to be able to use the bus, otherwise it's a barrier to using the bus or any other mode. And then you can make the argument, well, I don't need it. Ultimately, I think the government's aim is very much something needs to change about bus use, and that it shouldn't be seen as a mode of last resort, or should not be seen as only people who are not affluent or don't own a car to use it, but that bus use becomes less stigmatised, let's say, to some degree, but also becomes more reliable, more opportunity there for you to use it. For example, and I know, so I said here, this isn't London, actually, it shows that actually if you can provide good high levels of bus service alternative to the car, people will make use of it. And that's, I think, one of the aims that they are looking at. So we in this provision are looking at actually providing those additional, making additional services where we have existing. So we're not at this moment particularly looking at creating whole new bus routes. It's supplementing some of the existing bus services that they have, so that people who do use them have a more reliable service. In terms of our biggest corridor for bus use is Lakeside through to Sockets Heath. It goes through that corridor where and there are a significant number of bus services that run through there. So actually, access to Lakeside via bus is very popular.
No, I don't disagree with that, and I think you are right in those cases. However, that's not what we're talking about. We're not attempting to get people that already use the bus to use more buses. We're attempting to get people that don't use the bus to use more buses. And unless you're going to start restricting road use in favour of buses, so basically you cannot drive down that way, only a bus can do that, then I don't see how you're going to achieve that. I just think that's one of these sort of almost a socialist utopian dreams. We're all going to get on a bus, but it's not going to happen. And I think you can chuck as much money as you like. But Essex is not London. Essex is not, this Thurrock is not a major conurbation like some. It can work. I've seen it work myself. You can go up north, you can go to Manchester, and they've got a very well linked service. It works in big cities. It works in some of the bigger towns. Thurrock isn't like that, and I can't see it working here.
Okay, Councillor Kerry.
Yeah, thank you. I think the thing you said about having to be integrated is a really key point, because I have been looking into this sort of because I'm quite interested in regional mayors and things like that. And you did mention the regional mayors, and I know, for example, in I think Greater Manchester, they almost want to integrate the trams, the buses, to almost not you can never rival London's Underground, I think, but to sort of have that kind of, so you know where you're going, and but
be more TfL.
Yeah, your TfL, but for up north, But I think the problem is, I think Thurrock needs to work more with neighbouring, with its neighbours, because otherwise you're relying on people to go on the bus to make intra-Thurrock journeys, and not everyone wants to go from just Grays to Stamford, for example. They want to go to Basildon or further beyond, or they don't just want to go from Tilbury to Grays. They want to go from Tilbury to Grays and then towards Upminster. Or, I'm just thinking. So I think it almost has to be a bit bigger than just Thurrock, because I think this integration long term will work in places like the Greater Manchester region, the West, the West Midlands region under Mayor Andy Street, and obviously Mayor Andy Burnham in Manchester and so on. But I think if you think of their strategy, they're linking lots of boroughs within their city. We're just one borough. So I think we need to be linked with neighbouring boroughs to make it work, because otherwise, like Councillor Snell was sort of saying, people aren't going to give up their car because they don't just want to go to Purfleet and then stop there because it's the Thurrock boundary. They want to get further than that. It's like train use, isn't it? When I get on the train, I often go into London. And I wouldn't just use a train service that stopped at Purfleet because that's the Thurrock boundary. So I'd like to see more in terms of working with neighbouring boroughs to sort of put together the journeys that people want to make, both within Thurrock but also without Thurrock as well.
Yeah, I think one of those aspects is looking at that fair structure, fair process, of fair capping and integrating fares. So, like we said, working with those providers where you might have to change. So, for example, in example of going from Thurrock into London, it is having that engagement with those bus services that then run through Aveley and South Hoppingham, that are TfL run.
You can tap at Grays and then tap out when you get to King's Cross. Whereas different buses,
and that's what we're looking at, is
lots of separate fares,
how do we work with those operators to have either a single Thurrock kind of ticket, or one that can be integrated with C2C or other modes, and that is a challenge in so much. So this is very high level in terms of trying to get that funding to explore that option and how we do it. I mean, I'll be honest, the initial engagement we've had with just our bus operators has been scepticism on their part in terms of just having low fares for the sake of having low fares, because actually they understand the reality of once that subsidy goes, actually you go back up to higher fares.
It's about more than just the fares as well. I don't think cheap fares will necessarily get this. It's knowing that you tap in Trafford train station and you go via Basel and head towards Southend, but you know where you're ended up. You know you tap in once, you can sit and put your headphones in and read a book or whatever, and enjoy the journey like you would a train, I suppose.
And it's more than just that. It's providing the information, helping people to understand how you can complete your whole journey and how you do it. I think that is also one of those challenges of actually the more stops you introduce, the easier it is to use your car, because actually you can one. So it's providing that information to people to understand actually this is how you can undertake that journey. This is how much it will cost you. It's that full package.
And so if it's in the report, but I haven't seen it, it might well have been in the report. But this pot of 3 billion, I'm assuming that's national that's available. How much do you think we need in order to make an inroad into this? How much, in an ideal world, how much? Obviously, you'd want the whole 3 billion. I mean, realistic based on population and level of service already, deprivation, all the metrics. What would be a good figure for us?
So we didn't really look at it in that perspective as how many pounds per head do we need.
Yeah.
So within this short time frame, what we've identified is some of those quick wins that we could implement. The next stage, the idea of the BCIP is supposed to be a live document, and it goes over multi-years. So one of the first things, we don't even know what that allocation is and how that 3 billion is going to even be spread between the authorities. So the first stage for us is to develop this BCIP as it is, and to then revise it. And that is an opportunity out there. It's not like we just do one and that's it, we're done for. So it's the opportunity of then, as the transport strategy comes around, to start to integrate more of that and actually using that as the evidence base in terms of this is the policy we're looking at doing, and being able to revise that and then make that part of the next submission. And that will help us to understand more in terms of what it is. If we are successful in some of the requests that we've made, actually that will help us in terms of, we'll all then have understood actually what are the additional measures we need to implement, because we haven't explored.
So when do you think you'll be back here with a proposal that maybe doesn't make Councillor Snell get on a bus, but it makes him sit there and think, neutral about it, rather than, when do you think we'll be back here? Sorry to use you as an example, Councillor, but
that's quite
when do you think you'll be able to say something and I'll be able to look at Councillor Snell and go, okay, I'm not convinced yet, but I'm not as against it as I was, or
I think, judging by Councillor Snell's response, that might be a very long day. But I think we had a number of discussions this evening around actually it's not just one measure, it's a package of measures, and how we're going to with the parking, etc. And I think the local plan coming out, the new transport strategy coming out, and the supportive measures that will go in that. That's transformative stuff. And it's being able to provide those options and opportunities for people to think actually there's more than one way of getting around, or reducing the need to get around. So I think there'll be those who will be sceptical, and it'll be hard to change it just within the course of 12 months, because we've got £1 million from the government on bus services. So I think it's difficult to say, actually, with confidence, in 6 months' time I'll come here with a vastly improved package. It won't. It's that long-term work in place shaping, place changing, and providing opportunity for people. That will be when we come there, and I think that's what we're kind of starting to work towards. It's like our walking and cycling work. Actually, we face a lot of scepticism at the current moment about walking and cycling. People think, well, you're never going to do it. They thought that 40 years ago in the Netherlands and in Denmark, and now actually that's used as the example of doing that, because actually you have to make that investment in those measures for people to confidently say actually that opportunity exists.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, for your indulgence.
Councillor Snell.
Yeah, just the final point really, and my main fear on this is I go to London relatively often, and I use public transport there, not the buses, I hasten to add. But the reason that people use the buses, in part, is because they've made driving in London such a massive pain in the butt that you don't want to do it. And that's my fear for Thurrock, is if you go too far down a route like this, where just to try and force people onto a bus, you make driving a major problem for everybody else. And that's my fear, and I don't want to see that happen in Thurrock.
Are there any further comments or questions from committee? No. We'll go to the recommendation, then. It can be found on page 141. To note and endorse the bus service improvement plan production by Thurrock Council. Ask people to raise their hand for this one, as I think there may be someone against. All those in favour of recommendation 1.1? All those against recommendation 1.1?
I don't mind, just me.
Well, that's progress in the space of the last 5 minutes, you don't mind.
Do you do bus stops heated? You might get on a bus then. Always wait for a bus.
No.
Just stop the snow getting in, and you might have.
No.
So we'll move on to the final report for the evening, and that is the approach to the local plan found on page 229. Lee?
Thanks, Chair. All the members. So since the last update, good progress has been made with production of the local plan. and work is now underway in producing framework conversion. On page 232, it sets out proposed structure. This is essentially the skeleton of the plan. So chapters 1 to 4 can be largely completed by the end of this year. The middle section, which is essentially the strategic policies, those sections won't be able to progress until we've completed the design threat work and other evidence to go with that. But drafting has already started on the development management policies, which is chapter 8. So good news in the sense that the bones are there and it's starting to build up. If members could just flick back, sorry, the order of the report went back to page 230 and 231. So just as a quick note on the difference between the policies. So strategic policies are there to set out an overall strategy for pattern, scale and design quality of places, which is really focusing around housing, infrastructure, community facilities, conservation enhancement, natural building, historic environment, etc. They are policies which are going to look ahead over a minimum 15-year period, whereas large-scale developments, so when we're looking at new settlements or significant extensions to existing areas, then we would look for those policies to look even further forward, so at least 30 years. That's really taking into account likely timescales for delivery and like. Broad locations for development will be shown on a key diagram or policies map, which will be accompanying the local plan. Strategic policies also need to set out a clear strategy to bring forward sufficient land and sufficient rates, and this is really around deliverability of homes and infrastructure alongside that. So if they're the strategic policies, non-strategic policies are really focused on the local level. Best example of that will be the development management policies that you'll see at planning committee, and that it will be those standards. So back over to 233. Evidence base. Given the scale and complexity of our plan, it's necessary to commission quite a lot of technical studies. I think it's fair to say that's to ensure that the plan is positively prepared. So that means it needs to meet future development needs. Needs to be justified, needs to be based on evidence, because when we go to an examination public and we put our plan in front of the planning inspector, we need to demonstrate why the policies say what they say and why development is proposed in the locations they are. And probably the third point is it needs to be consistent with national policy. So on 233, we've got a list of technical studies which are currently in production or about to be commissioned, and you can see those there. There's inevitable overlap and they feed into each other, and there's three in the middle that jump out from the page for me, just given the conversation we've been having this evening. The Vision for Movement, Thurrock 2050, Transport Strategy, and our Strategic Transport Model, which is all linked to pretty much everything which we've just been talking about this evening, links in with the basic plan, parking standards, and buses, etc. So that's all part of that. Obviously, what we're looking to do is to make sure that members continue to be briefed on this, and we're looking to have further workshops, which will sit alongside task force as a way to have that two-way conversation with yourselves. The quick update in terms of the design threats, so they are going back out for community design threat workshops, which will start to roll out in November and December, and probably into New Year. Further series of community meetings are also set up to go around the 8 design threat areas. So it's all about engagement over the next couple of months. Obviously been hampered by COVID and restrictions in place. Now that they've been relaxed, we're able to get out. From there, we move into a series of reports which starts to build up a development framework, which sets out visions, guiding principles to steer development, and they then sit alongside the local plan. That will then feed into the housing supply topic paper, which starts to give an early indication about how the scale and distribution of future housing needs to be met. Obviously, local plan is not a plan's plan. I think it's set up before. It's a corporate document, but it serves to link in various strategies, economic, housing, health and wellbeing strategies, and the like. Really starts to draw them together. Health and wellbeing strategy is going out for consultation starts on Monday. What we're looking to do is work with colleagues in that service area to make sure that when we're going out for consultation on local plan, that we have a space in that room, in that forum, for health colleagues to take advantage of that platform and really feed in and sort of piggyback from that and vice versa. So we're really looking to join up in that sense as well. Report is for noting, but there's two points to it. The second one being that it sounds quite forceful actually, that committee continues to receive regular updates from us, but hopefully they'll be useful to me. Again, snapshot in time. It's on the work programme as well for further updates, but have to field any questions.
Councillor Kerry.
Thank you very much for this, and obviously we've spoken a lot during sort of briefings and things about this. So I think in terms of housing, it won't sort of surprise you if I mention that as well as policies on affordable housing, I'd really like to see something really specific about council and housing association housing, because when you think of the scale of our waiting list in this borough, I think I really would like to see, in addition to the affordable housing, actually specifically how we're moving forward with council housing and housing association. And in terms of the community facilities, I think, you know, we've always spoken about housing numbers and things like that, but I think we really need to be really giving it a lot of thought and planning about health, education and culture. You know, I was thinking the other day, just with everything that's going on, for example, the Thameside, you know, that's one part of our cultural heritage in this borough. And I think we need to be seeing culture alongside the housing, because to live, obviously everyone, first and foremost, everyone wants a home. But then when you do live somewhere, you want the culture to go alongside it. So I think I really need to emphasise that as well. It's not so much a question, just more, well, I suppose with the housing, it's more of a request that we really do specifically talk about sort of council and housing association, but then we need that wider discussion about culture and preserving what cultural heritage we've got already, and also looking at what new assets we need to put in place so that Thurrock doesn't become a cultural desert. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chair.
Chair?
Yep, Lee.
So absolutely, and we've spoken before about obviously through task force the report which is due to go to the end of November meeting, which is on models. I think it's titled Model for Housing. Yeah. So yeah. What I think would probably be quite helpful, again, Joe, with your agreement, is to circulate that report to this committee as a briefing note. So there's that. Yeah. So that obviously members that are on that committee will hear and see the presentation, but it'd be helpful just to have that, so we've got that and that can sit alongside these updates.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lee.
Fantastic. Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. It's really informative. Housing strategy at the moment is being wrote and drafted because it's going out to consultation. Can that also be plugged into your list of technical studies as well? Because that will be all encompassing on everything from housing from HMOs onwards. Have we got a green space strategy? If so, can that also be plugged into it? So we've got a completely characterisation study of the whole of the borough. And can I also request that any report that goes to the local plan maybe dovetail into this one as well, because they do come hand in glove with this committee as well, please, going forward.
That makes sense again for you, Chair. So we've got green and blue infrastructure strategy is probably what I think you're going to be referring to. That'll be that part. But the housing strategy, absolutely. As I say, they're not silo strategies or documents. They have to work together, and that's exactly what the team is doing at the moment. Is linking them together. So the housing strategy paper obviously informs this, and vice versa. So yeah.
Thank you,
Ray. Are there any further comments from? No. Well, Councillor Watson touched on my point. I was going to ask what our sort of green space strategy, park strategy was, but did you say it was the green and blue infrastructure
Yeah, so green blue infrastructure will be, but then with these studies, lots of them overlap. So we're going to have green belt, so stage 2 green belt review, landscape character stage 2 report, and green blue infrastructure. That's your evidence base, but then on top of that, you've got your design stress and your local, where your local community will say, we really value this piece of land and this particular area of open space, and we want that to be designated, and there's a whole route through designation. So lots of tiering, lots of layers going on.
Thank you. Councillor Watson?
Can I just ask one more question, please, Ray? In your technical studies, you've got interim infrastructure delivery plan. When is the actual full one going to be?
So this is, where are we on?
The technical study 3.6?
Yeah, in the report, it will explain why we're doing certain things in the way that we're doing. I think it's paragraph 3.5. So what we'll do is we'll continue working with the evidence base, which will continue throughout 2022. So we'll have Reg 18, so that's the draft plan, around about sometime next year, but that won't stop the evidence base. Evidence base will continue to run all the way up to the submission of the plan. So we will have interim strategies and interim documents in place. Transport strategy will be one of those of interim, get refreshed, keep moving so it doesn't stay still until we get to the point where we go for adoption the year 12 months after. What we don't want to do is just wait for everything and not bring anything forward in the meantime. But we really want to make sure when we put the plan forward that it is absolutely up to date and it's also been tested over that period of time as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your report, Lee. With that, we'll move to the couple of recommendations that can be found on page 229. Recommendations 1.1 and 1.2. I'll take them both together. Are we all agreed with recommendations 1.1?
Yeah, agreed.
Fantastic. Okay, well, that was the final report of the evening. The last item on the agenda is the work programme, and the next meeting in December can be found on pages 240 to 241. Do members of Democratic Services have any comments? Councillor Kerry?
Yeah, just going back to two other items, the A13 and Stamford, I genuinely sort of trying to keep, trying to conceal my anger a little bit at the level of report that we had, because I just felt it was insulting. And I do realise that the gentleman who was presenting said he'd only been in post 3 weeks and it wasn't his name on the report and things like that. But I think we need to see something better in the next meeting. It's just, I think when I pulled out, there's one report, 1 page. There's the other, for the amount of money and time that we've been spending on that, I was quite insulted by the level of report for us as a committee. With the, we're all diligent members of this committee. We all put the work in, and we have different views on things, but we all come from a good place with it. I just think we almost need to rerun it and actually properly go into it, because the report just didn't allow us. I think both reports held us back tonight, even to the point where we did get that date. For example, with Stamford, we got the date of December 2023, but because we only got it tonight, that we hadn't come prepared with that in mind, and looking back at previous reports, like we all, when we put the work in. So I think I'd like to see them come back, but with actually a proper report that, actually respects us as a committee. Yeah,
I mean, we've currently got 4 things on the December agenda, so there's some room there. I'm happy to see those again.
I did ask it, and I could it be a standard agenda item, both one for the. I thought we were November, December, and February for those 2 agenda items. Just keep them up to date on it.
Yeah, I mean, we've got December and February left. Yeah. 2 meetings.
Standard agenda items, please.
Yep, certainly. That's no problem with myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could you push one up from February to December? Because obviously February's looking quite busy, isn't it? Whereas December's the approach to the local plan. I assume that's not coming back, or is it? Are we doing that?
Oh, the standing item.
Yeah.
It can be a briefing paper if you get busy.
We can make that. What we'll do is we'll keep December as is, because with the 2 additions we've now got 6 for December. We'll make the approach to the local plan. We can make that briefing now if the committee's happy with that. That leaves 5. Grace, you had your hand.
Yeah, Chair, there's a report added for 7th December. This was after the agenda was published, and it's paid for car parking.
Right.
Yeah, so that one will be for this December.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, that makes 6 for December and 5 for February, so. Okay, if we have no further comment, I will close this evening's PTR meeting at 8:59.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, officers.
Thank you.